I'm going to call the meeting to order for the purpose of electing a chair. If I could have a nomination at this time for the position of chair, please. Don? And is there a seconder? Mac. And are there any other nominations to come forward at this time for the position of chair? Seeing none, I'll close nominations. All those in favor that Councillor Stroud be elected as chair, and that carries. And I'll now take a nomination for the position of vice chair. Councillor Stroud.
I'd nominate Don Taylor.
And is there a seconder? Mac. Are there any other nominations to come forward at this time for the position of vice chair? Seeing none, I'll close nominations and I'll call the question. All those in favor that Don be vice chair, and that carries. And I'll pass the chair to Councillor Stroud.
I see one of our members has new glasses. You have new glasses. They're very stylish. So we're called to order, and we have an agenda. It's the typical format. Just to point out, there are things in the working group reports. There's a couple of reports there, and there's a few applications for heritage permits. There's the report on the grants changes, and there have been no proposed additions from staff since this was published. I need a mover and a seconder to get the agenda on the floor. Moved by Catherine, seconded by Peter. Are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Yes, Mac.
Not a proposed change. I say that I'm going to have to leave early today. So I will, as long as there's still a quorum, I'm going to have to go probably 10:30 or 11 o'clock or something like that.
Okay, so noted. So Mac's leaving early today. I believe, how much quorum is 6? We need 6 for quorum, so that should be okay. All right, so with no proposed changes, we'll vote on the agenda as printed. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. We now have the minutes from November 15th. So we need a mover and a seconder to get them on the floor. Moved by Don, seconded by Catherine. Are there any errors or omissions in last month's minutes? Seeing none, we will vote on accepting the minutes as printed. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. So now we're at disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, there are no presentations, delegations, or briefings. And then under business, there's nothing in the first three. So we're just business 9D, right into the heritage permits. The first one is 488 Division Street. It's a Part 4 application, and I think Mackenzie is going to introduce it.
For the property at 488 Division Street. It's a Part 4 designated property, and it's located on the west side of Division between Concession and Guy Street. It's a 1.5-story limestone house that was constructed between 1860 and 1878. And this application has been submitted to request permission to make a number of alterations to a later piece of an addition that's attached to the rear of the main limestone dwelling. And these alterations are being requested following the removal of several large and unsympathetic modern additions that were located between this original limestone piece of the dwelling and a log cabin that had been in the rear yard. And these are to accommodate the renovation of the dwelling into 2 rental units. So it should be noted that The log cabin that was a heritage attribute of the property was demolished without permission. And in order to bring the property into compliance with the Ontario Heritage Act for the alterations that have begun, the owner is now requesting permission for these alterations, including the replacement of vinyl siding, some existing vinyl windows with new vinyl units, as well as the construction of a rear deck, of secondary vestibule, and 2 doors, all at the rear of the house. On the south side of the house, the owner is required to install a new emergency hatch for the basement unit to comply with Ontario Building Code, and they wish to modify the existing modern vinyl windows by raising the bottom sill and infilling the space with reclaimed limestone. This application also includes a request to install 2 small wooden porches at each entrance on the front facade and replace a small portion of vinyl siding beneath the eaves on the southern stone wing with gray tinted stucco. So this is a photo of the existing south side of the building. These are the long modern windows that the applicant is proposing to raise the bottom sill. The Statement of Cultural Heritage Value notes this property as having historical and associative value through its connection with John Bryant Jr. He was a stone dealer, a farmer, and a quarryman, whose career may have played a role in the construction of this building. The bylaw also notes that the property has a rural and agricultural history as a former chicken hatchery. The property would have been located just outside the Kingston proper, and this property is a remaining example of that rural character that's now within the city's urban area. As the owner's proposal is to remove unsympathetic alterations and improve the appearance of the property, staff are of the opinion that the alterations will have little impact on those cultural intangible attributes for this property. So the removal of the unsympathetic modern additions at the rear of the limestone house has exposed the roofline and rear facade of what was likely a mid-20th century addition. So prior to its removal, staff attended a site visit with the owner and were able to document the property, including these rear additions. Staff noted that the rear additions to the main dwelling were in poor condition and had little heritage value. So while this work was completed without the required permits from a heritage perspective, the removal of those unsympathetic modern additions have not significantly affected the identified heritage attributes for this property. The owner has indicated that when the additions were removed, a vinyl siding similar to what is on the south side of the building was already in place on most of the rear and north facade. So the owner is requesting permission to continue to replace the siding with new beige colored siding. These portions of the house also include several modern window openings which the owner has indicated already exist, and he wishes to replace them with vinyl units, replace the vinyl units with new vinyl units. So while vinyl windows aren't typically recommended for heritage buildings, this section is not original on the property and has been altered at several points in its history. The rear facade has until recently also been covered, so given that it's at the rear of the house and it's not visible from the street, staff support the use of vinyl in this location, as there will be no impacts on the identified heritage attributes. The owner also wishes to construct a vestibule at the rear as an entranceway to the basement unit, as well as a rear deck. This entrance will also not be visible from the street, as it will be considerably lower than the roof line of the main dwelling. The entranceway will be clad in a matching beige vinyl siding and will feature black asphalt shingles, which is consistent with the roofing of the main dwelling. The deck will be a simple wood design and will be stained in a natural color to protect it from the exterior elements and will not be attached into the masonry. Best practices in heritage conservation recommend that new additions and elements within a designated property should be compatible in terms of form and material and clearly secondary to the heritage resource. Ultimately, given this portion of the house will not be visible and has very little heritage value, staff are supportive of this alteration as it meets the standards and guidelines. On the south facade, the owner is proposing to provide better security for this section of the house. They're proposing to shorten these windows and replace the existing narrow windows as well as the emergency hatch. Staff have included a condition to require that only sections where there are vinyl siding on the stone already. Any areas where stone exists, the stone should be left exposed and repaired where necessary. These vinyl units will be replaced with new vinyl units, which will be like-for-like replacements. And staff have also recommended that they be a matte color and not a bright white, so as not to detract from the limestone. On the front facade, the owner is proposing to replace an existing section of vinyl siding with new stucco siding to match the limestone of the main dwelling. And staff have recommended the owner explore matching limestone in place of this stucco. However, given the stucco is a traditional material, staff are supportive that it will be compatible with the limestone and in keeping with the character of the dwelling. The application also includes a request to install 2 new porches on the front facade. These porches are proposed to be a simple wood design with 3 steps leading up to the door. The porch at the main entrance is proposed to be symmetrical with 2 sets of steps leading to the central landing in order to echo the symmetry of the facade. A porch is proposed at the secondary entrance with a small landing area, however, with only 1 set of steps. As this design will be low and in a material that's compatible with the character of the building, it will not detract from the heritage attributes of the limestone house. Staff have recommended that the design for the railings be simple, but a turn design, and should have a neutral paint scheme so as not to draw attention from the original building. Throughout this review of the heritage permit, the applicant has indicated that the railings actually may not be required at all under the Ontario Building Code. So they may consider having only 1 step in the front yard, and staff support both of these proposals as the removal of the railings will allow for the facade of the building to be viewed more clearly from the street. So this application was circulated internally to all the departments. This property is subject to a consent application as well as a minor variance to permit the porches in the front yard, and as well a building permit application will be required. There are some considerations from Utilities Kingston with respect to a sanitary sewer that runs diagonally along the rear of the property, and the applicant is aware of this and is working with UK to address these concerns. This application was circulated to Heritage Kingston. Staff received a number of comments in response to the circulation. This application actually went through 2 rounds of technical circulations. Following the first, there was confusion about what was happening, and we organized a site visit with a number of members on the committee. And so following that site visit, we received 2 comments from 2 members. One member asked for clarification on the proposal to repair the windows, and staff clarified that in order to help secure the building, a separate permit application had been submitted to facilitate this work on the windows. The owner provided documentation to demonstrate the windows could not be repaired and proposed to reinstate new wood windows in the same 6/6 style that would have been in the house originally for all the openings in the stone portion of the house. The heritage permit for the windows also permitted the reinstatement of vinyl windows in the vinyl-clad portion of the building on the north facade, as well as replacement of 2 front doors with new 6-panel doors with aluminum cladding. This member also requested further details on the railing proposed for the porches and expressed concern with the proposed design. Staff have stressed the importance for caring and enhancing the heritage attributes of the building and have forwarded a list of local contractors who specialize in heritage buildings At the time this report was finalized, the owner was considering removing those railings from the front porch. However, if they were required, they would be a simple wood design to distinguish them from the original building. Staff have included a condition of approval to require the paint samples be provided at the building permit stage, and have suggested a two-tone gray and white scheme similar to the neighboring property. Another member noted that the complexity of this file, given the owner has permanently removed a heritage attribute without permission. Given this situation, he suggested moving forward, any proposed alteration should fully conform with the windows policy and other applicable guidelines for heritage designated properties. This member also suggested that a strict interpretation of the windows policy should be implemented, noting that the windows were original and should be retained. He suggested the windows could be replaced if a windows expert could recommend that, and suggested options for aluminum storms. This comment was considered by staff, and staff did request that the applicant obtain an opinion from a windows expert who recommended replacement. So staff are of the view that this was not reasonable to require the repair of the remaining window when others would be replaced, and given the symmetry of the facade was an identified attribute. So in conclusion, staff recommend approval of this application subject to the conditions outlined in this report, and there are several. There are no objections from a built heritage perspective, and no concerns were raised from internal departments. So this is a Part 4 application, so we're happy to take questions at this time.
Thank you, Mackenzie. So it's the regular committee procedure for this, so members of the committee can ask questions only. Save your comments to the debate section, and then we go to members of the public, and then we debate and vote. So questions only at this point for members of the committee. Yes, Peter.
Thank you. I don't recall having read this, that there was a statement explicitly as to the age of that southern portion. Was that built at the same time as the original house, or is it a later addition, or is that unknown?
Through Mr. Chair, I believe this is the southern portion, the southern wing that's alluded to in the designation bylaw, so I think it's a later addition.
But it's considered as a heritage attribute.
That's correct. It's part of the main dwelling.
Any other questions? Don?
I guess it's disappointing that the front windows couldn't be saved so that there would be at least some sort of good heritage character to the front. But I guess I hoped that the owner would consult a heritage window expert, and can you tell me who they consulted?
The question is from the members, who was consulted for the window repair versus replacement question?
Through Mr. Chair, the applicant provided an opinion from a windows expert who provided the windows.
Okay, so staff is not divulging the identity of the Windows provider, but it's the agent that is providing the replacement windows.
I have to comment that Windows salesmen always recommend replacement. That's all.
Okay, but keep your comments to the comment section. Thank you. Any other questions? Catherine.
From drawing number A3, the top three windows in that facade, how are they going to look? what are the replacements going to look like?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is the intended look, the intended appearance for those windows.
Okay.
Next, we got Mac.
Just another question about the windows. You know, I certainly have, well, I'll comment about the window person being the expert afterwards, but what they say a wood window to replace with mullions the same, but I mean, what kind of wood window? We need some details on that. Or do you have details on that is my question?
The windows are aluminum clad wood windows in a 6/6 style.
Any other questions?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, is the question relating to these windows or the front windows? Yeah, they're aluminum clad wood.
Mike.
And just one more question there. I know when I was on site with him, we talked about all windows in the stone buildings would be either restored or done like with the wood clad, you know, STLs. So all the windows in the stone part of the building are being done this way?
That's correct.
Any other questions? Councillor Shaw.
Thanks. Just so that I'm understanding recommendation 4, is that where the windows are coming in? The renovation of the limestone facade on the south facade to facilitate shorter, more traditional style windows. No, then that does. So I'm trying to figure out in the recommendation where the new windows on the east side, which is the very front, are coming into the recommendation. It doesn't seem to mention.
So just to clarify, the windows on the east facade on the front,
Yes.
front-facing facade, so those were approved. They're not part of this application.
Okay.
That's right.
So they were previously approved. Okay, thank you.
Paul.
Maybe one of our built heritage people, the staff, can clarify. On A3, Exhibit C, the cellar hatch to be comply with OBC and it's just hatched lines, what is that?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So that is the hatch that's required under the building code for access into the building, into the basement.
What material is it going to be made of? And
I'm not entirely sure of the material. I believe the applicant is here this morning if he knows, if he'd like to speak.
Yes, so members of the public, maybe if you could just keep track of any questions we're going that way, and then when members of the public have an opportunity to speak, they can address all those concerns. So just yeah, you can maybe remind him before he speaks if we come. We'll just finish with questions now. If you have questions to anyone other than staff, we'll just make note of them and have them addressed at a later time. Yes, Catherine.
Still on the facade, this facade, is the clapboard portion of it part of the heritage designation?
Thank you. I don't believe so. This section was a later addition. I believe it's actually vinyl.
No, I can see it's vinyl, but the question again, it refers to the upper windows, and you know, I understand that what you've said about the bottom windows. but given the peculiar shape of those upper windows, I'm just wondering how it's going to look when they're finished. Are there any, is it 6/6 in the middle, or what is it?
I believe it's just a single pane. So these 3 windows would just be one single pane. And the windows above, the shape and design are not being changed. Through you, Mr. Chair, the applicant has provided that the cellar hatch will be aluminum-clad wood.
That was through staff. They've answered one of the questions. Okay, so as you, before we get to the deliberations, members of the public have a chance to speak to the application, including the applicant if he so chooses. Anyone that wishes to speak just has to come to a microphone. Yeah, there's one there.
Good morning, everyone. This is Abdul. I'm from 488 Division Street, the owner, and so today's here for the meeting. Any question? Just let me know, please.
So I believe there was a question about the hatch, which was answered already. Was there anything else that people were asking that staff didn't know? The window panes. So I guess that's it. I guess if you don't have any comments, then you don't have to say anything. But you've already answered the one question about the hatch.
Actually, all the information I provided before to Mackenzie in the city of Kingston. So any additional questions, I'm here to answer.
Well, I'll allow any last questions while the applicant is here, but if not, then thank you very much. Any other members of the public? That's good, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the report and the presentation. Very thorough presentation and report. And excellent quality engineering drawings, right, for a very problematic project. So I think that's really been high quality work going in. Mention was made of the log cabin that was demolished without permission. And I'm wondering if there are any consequences to the owner for doing that. Obviously, we can't go back. I'm concerned that there's maybe some practical plumbing issues. You're trying to make what was really a disaster building. I live quite near there. I walk by it, and I'm often curious as to how it was going to go. So I'm really supportive of the work that's going on, and it's challenging for sure. Mentioned that there's going to be a accommodation in the basement, and I'm wondering if this is a basement or a cellar classification, because there is a difference there. And just have one curious question. In the report, it says that it would have been classified in Pittsburgh Township before, and I'm wondering if that should be Kingston Township. So I always thought Pittsburgh was on the sort of the north and east of the main part of the city of Kingston. So just a small point. Just wish the applicant and his staff on the project all the best. This is a sort of what I'll classify also as sort of like a almost gone house that's being reclaimed. It was really almost a total disaster for a really long time. So really great work to get that reclaimed. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just remind staff that any questions directed your way that are not subject of the heritage application, you're not to respond to. Any other members of the public? Okay, so staff has a chance to respond. Go ahead, Mr. McLean.
Through you, Mr. Chair, with respect to the log cabin, the city is pursuing that matter through a legal process. The other comments, I didn't catch the second comment, so I may leave that one to Mackenzie to respond to. With respect to the occupancy of the basement or cellar, that the occupancy will be compliant with the Ontario Building Code. And I think there was a comment or question about where this sits relative to former township boundaries. I don't know that that's relevant, but I believe it's in the former city of Kingston.
Thank you. All right, so we need a mover and a seconder for the recommendations. To get them on the floor, you'll see there's 5 recommendations and then 11 conditions. Moved by Councillor Schell, and seconded by Paul. See, in my mind, I guess I'm missing Sherman. So you see the 5 recommendations there, and there's 11 conditions. So, any comments at this point? Mac?
Just one comment to start with about the cellar hatch to comply with OBC. I know you have to have access to the cellar, but it doesn't have to be in that side wall. It could be in the floor from the inside, or it could be in the back of the house. Because what I think the owner was talking about was a wood-clad metal, which is really a piece of plywood with metal on it. You know, and that doesn't seem very sightly on the side of the wall that you would be able to see. He certainly could put the hatch hole in from the floor above. He has to have access to it, but it doesn't have to be in the outside or around the side. So that's one recommendation I would make. The windows in the if you could show me this the as-is photograph of the south side.
Sorry, I missed the last question.
Can you show me the photograph from the south side, please? So when you look at those windows, they don't really line up with what's shown here in the drawings. I mean, the windows are the same shape, but they're clearly reframing them. So if they can reframe them, I just find those angular windows to be totally inappropriate. Why wouldn't they just, I mean, if they're going to leave them right where they are, we can't really do anything about it, I don't think. But if they're changing the locations, which they certainly are, they're moving the windows in closer to the side of that big window, I would argue for getting rid of the trapezoids. I guess that's it for now. Thank you.
Maybe staff could clarify for those second-story windows pictured there. Is that part of this application?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the drawing is actually just, it's just not reflective of what's being proposed. Those upper windows are not, the openings are not changing. They just wish to change the units, but the design and the location are not changing.
And so as such, they're not part of the application? Okay, so we don't need to debate the upper windows because they're not part of the application. Okay, any other comments? Don.
You know, I guess the window situation is a bit unfortunate, but I would certainly prefer that the windows in the stone part of the extension should match the front windows, that is 6/6, because they look appropriate. You can, from the street, you see both the front and the side at the same time. So I would certainly urge the applicants to, at least on the ground floor, the main floor, to use matching 6/6 windows similar to the ones in the front.
Okay, well, just to that point, if staff could just answer, in the conditions, it talks about the the policy, the Windows policy. So is there some flexibility there as to the exact design of the replacement windows?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given that these windows are already modern openings, we didn't feel it was reasonable to require a similar style to the front. However, we could include an option as part of the conditions to consider, for the applicant to consider the 6/6 style in this location as well.
So would we need an amendment to the conditions to make that happen?
Yes, that's correct.
So I would suggest, Mr. Taylor, that if you want to specify conditions about the windows, you'd have to add it as an amendment.
So I'll move an amendment to add a condition that the applicant consider using or installing 6/6 windows on the stone portion of the south front, matching the other 6/6 windows in the same style as.
The clerk is writing this down as a 12th condition, unless it makes more sense to not have it as number 12. And he's going to read back what he's taken down in dictation.
That the applicant consider installing 6/6 windows on the stone portion of the south front, matching the other 6 windows located at the front.
Are you seconding? So, seconded by Mac. So if I could just ask staff, as worded, if that amendment is consistent with the rest of the recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it is consistent with the recommendation. Perhaps the applicant wants to weigh in on whether this would be appropriate as part of your proposal.
Well, I don't think it's necessary, really, because it's being proposed as an option, as a suggestion, right? When it's made as a suggestion, then it's a non-binding suggestion from the committee that, if feasible, clearly, if feasible, that the applicant consider, right? So, just read it again, James, so we're clear on what it says.
That the applicant consider installing 6/6 windows on the stone portion of the south front, matching the 6/6 windows located at the front of the building.
Yeah, so I'll just explain. So if we pass this amendment, then it's a suggestion to consider maybe the 6-pane, like this window here behind you, 6/6, design the front end so that the front and back windows match up. Only in the stone portion at the bottom. It's you have the final decision, but it would be a suggestion. Yeah. Okay, so let's debate the amendment, Mac. No. Any further debate on the amendment? Okay, we'll vote on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. So that's been added. Any other? Yes, Mac.
I guess read the hatch hole. I'd like to add another point to the approval. My point would be that the hatch hole be moved either around to the back of the house or to the inside of the house, so it isn't facing the so it can't be seen from the street. And there is actually an existing window on the back of the house that would be, fairly easy to. It said on the plan, shows in the plans, there's an existing window on the back that they're closing up to make, easily make a hatch hole, and then the hole would be filled in with limestone.
Is it your intention, Mac, that this amendment be something that's binding? Okay. Maybe the clerk could just read out what he's got here. No, he wants it to be like that.
That the hatch be moved to the rear of the house or inside the house to not be visible from the street.
So this would, if passed, this amendment would compel the applicant to move the basement entrance, and I'm wondering if staff has any input on this suggestion. Mr. Newman?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So just in speaking with the applicant, excuse me, I understand that physically there's not an ability to put the hatch at the back. I understand the structural components of the back wall preclude the ability to put a hole in the back, and similarly to put the hatch on the inside. Just in terms of the way the floor plan's been arranged with respect to it, it's a bedroom, and there's a unit in the basement that would be entering into a separate unit potentially. So there's a bit of a conflict there. If there's a way we can make the hatch work where it's proposed, I think that would be the best option for the constraints available to the property, but we could look at colors and finishing if that helps.
So
could you just put up the shot of the back wall of the, I guess that's the west wall, please?
That window goes into the bedroom porch.
Right. No, there isn't. No, that's right. So that door at the bottom goes into a basement unit, and then that basement unit stops roughly somewhere where the stairs start to go down, and then it's a crawl space just for that last part. Is that right? I don't quite understand that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, on drawing A5 on page 33 of the agenda, there's floor plans for the basement.
We could also do a hatch between the bedroom and the storage as well. You know, sorry. That.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may. Just in speaking with the applicant here, I understand that if there's a concern with the hatch, and if it prevents us from potentially making a decision today or recommendation, he'd be willing to close in that access to the cellar and simply not establish the cellar or the basement as an occupiable space for the short term, and then in the future, if we need to come back to committee to look at an alteration to allow for the occupancy of the basement, then we could do that through a separate process. I think the immediate interest is in getting the upper portion suited for occupancy, so the basement can be cordoned off for the purposes of seeing this application advance.
Yes, Mac.
I'm not really quite sure why that would hold it up. I mean, there's certainly ways of getting through it, but I guess I also could live with something that wasn't just a piece of aluminum covering up a piece of plywood. Even if it was like, you know, board and batten or something like that, to at least be relevant to the area. I mean, a piece of plywood covered with metal is just gonna look like crap, I'm sorry, you know. If you could make it look better, I could probably live with it, you know, like board and batten might suit as a, you know, as a relative, you know, option. I could live with that.
I'm wondering, Mac, if we can put in an amendment that would require we need to decide as a committee if we're okay with there being a hatch in the street facade, and then I guess the amendment needs to be worded in such a way that improves the look, right? So I don't know if we need to call a short recess to come up with an amendment that would be appropriate, unless you have it right now.
Well, my amendment then would be that the hatch not be metal clad, that it be either board and batten or a vertical channel siding.
Read that back, and then I'll be looking for a seconder.
That the hatch not be fabricated out of metal cladding and be fabricated either out of board and batten or vertical channel wood siding.
Seconder? Paul? Councillor Shaw has a question.
You'd probably know this, Ontario Building Code, I presume that hatch needs to be fireproof? No? So metal, okay. Then that. Okay. So, I mean, that's basically it, so long as it still meets the Ontario Building Code with this request. Yeah.
Just to clarify, so staff would, of course, make sure that any recommendation would be compliant with all legislation, including fire requirements and so on. Yeah, so that's a normal process. Okay, so we have an amendment on the floor. Any debate? I think it's clear the purpose of the amendment. Seeing none, we'll vote on the amendment. I'll just have the clerk read it one more time.
That the hatch not be fabricated by metal cladding, and the hatch be fabricated by either board and batten or vertical channel wood siding.
Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. So that's just the material that the hatch to be made out of is recommended to be not the metal clad wood that you had suggested, but there's two options there. Yes, Mr. Newman. Right. Basically wood clad rather than metal clad. Yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just wonder if the committee would entertain maybe another option tied to that. And sorry, I didn't catch you in time to be able to suggest this, but the proponent is willing to enclose the hatch and look at an opportunity that would allow for it to be established on the interior. So I wonder if we could have that as an option, provided it meets the building code requirements. It might actually benefit the building.
Okay, so we just need an amendment to the amendment to leave that option open. Do you know what that would look like, James? Do you know what it would look like?
Yeah, that would be a friendly amendment for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so just one sec.
So that'd be either clad with board and batten siding or vertical wood channel siding, or that it be moved from that wall location.
So in other words, Mr. Newman, you're saying that the amendment ideally would have the option that we just passed or the option to move as was previously suggested. So in other words, a two-pronged amendment that leaves the option. Yeah, so the original, what you suggested was moving it to just be moved, okay. Okay, so Mac, you need to make an amendment that clause 6 be further amended to include the wording or that the hatch be moved.
I make an amendment that the amendment be further changed so that we either go with the initial amendment or the hatch gets moved. Okay. As a point, I think you could probably do it from the mechanical room into that space as well, but just as long as you get.
Right. So that now this is the sixth condition of the list of on the recommendations, and it would, if passed, how would the full amendment read then, James?
So the new clause 6 would read that the hatch be not fabricated by metal cladding and be fabricated by either board and batten or vertical channel wood siding, or that the hatch be moved.
So on the amendment to the amendment, any discussion? All right, we'll vote on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? You didn't get the seconder? Does anyone remember who seconded that? Paul. Okay, that carries. So there's two options there. Okay. Any other discussion on the recommendations? Seeing none, we will vote on the entire set of recommendations and so 6 recommendations and 12 conditions. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. Good luck with the work, and thank you. Okay, so now we have a Part 5 application for a heritage permit. Renovations to the Richardson Bathhouse, 1 King Street East. This is on City Parks property, and I believe we've got Parks Manager Neil Unsworth here to speak to the matter as part of the introduction.
I can't get the mouse to work. I think so. Yeah, we're good, right? Yeah, thanks. Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this application is at 1 King Street East. It's located in McDonald Park, and it's regarding the Richardson Bathhouse. The subject property includes a number of structures, including the 1896 Newlands Pavilion, the bathhouse itself built in 1919, the 1925 Cross of Sacrifice, the Gaskin Lion that was donated in 1909, and the Francis Willard Memorial Fountain from 1939. The Murney Tower is in the middle of this property. However, it's on a separate holding owned by the federal government. But today, the specific application deals with the Richardson Bathhouse. The applicants which is the City of Kingston, have applied for a number of restoration and alterations to this building, including repointing, repairing, and cleaning all masonry, repairs to wooden features, including windows and soffits, repainting all painted surfaces, repairing clay roof as necessary, and infilling the former canteen and window on the western wall of the building. There are also extensive interior renovations to this building that are proposed. Interior alterations on this particular property are not subject to Heritage Act approvals. So the subject property is designated under Part 4. It was designated originally in 1980 for the Newlands Pavilion, again in 1984 for the Richardson Bathhouse. Those were amended in 2007 and also added a number of other features to the Heritage Attributes list. And of course, this property is in the Old Sydenham Heritage Conservation District, which was designated in 2015. And as I mentioned, the Murney Tower is a separate holding. It's a National Historic Site and part of the World Heritage Site. The Richardson Bathhouse itself was designed by Toronto architect Barnard Park in 1918. It was donated by the Richardson family in memory of George Richardson, who was killed in action in 1916. And the heritage attributes of this building include the stone walls and the bracketed hoods over the windows, the chimneys, et cetera, et cetera. The most significant alteration before us today is the removal and infilling of the western canteen window and door, which was added in the 1970s. The proposal is to return this facade to its original appearance with a window near the cornice line and limestone infilling. So I won't go through great detail on the alterations themselves. Manager Neil Ellensworth is here for Parks Department to walk you through some of those in a little more detail. We did circulate this application to our internal departments. Building permits are required. We did have a comment from forestry that there are a number of mature trees and they're looking for details on tree protection, which will be done as part of this project. This was also circulated to this committee and we received no concerns from members. So, Mr. Chair, we recommend approval of this, and I will pass it over to Mr. Ellensworth just to walk you through the bigger picture.
Thank you, Ryan. For the committee, the renovation of the property has been done in part over the years. In the last 10 years, there's been interior renovations to comply with accessibility requirements under local policies and changing standards with the Provincial Access for Ontarians with Disabilities Act and the Building Code. They are now out of date again, and also in need of upgrades through life cycle expectancy. The other issues we're dealing with in the building are some HVAC systems. The boiler hasn't functioned in years, and general wear and tear on the building. It's time for a renovation. So when looking at that, we evaluated the opportunities to renovate the building and bring them up to modern standards. And the accessibility policies that the city has under the Facilities Accessibility Design Guidelines require that we create washrooms and change rooms that accommodate people with disabilities, and the prescriptive spaces are very specific. And in addition to a male and a female side, they also require, if it's possible, that we provide a washroom for universal use. And so with the modifications to the building, we were able to achieve all of that. The space that was formerly used as a canteen is required for the purpose of accommodating all of those functions. And I can speak about the removal of the canteen space in a subsequent slide. The interior vestibule is also for access and gathering and the amount of expected use of the space. It's compact at the moment, and we believe that by improving the circulation in and out of the washrooms and change room spaces, by the removing of the privacy wing walls that extend into the central foyer or the central vestibule, that we'll be able to create a sort of more regular space that the public can gather in. There are existing interior finishes that we'll make every effort to try and reclaim and resalvage. Basically, the center of the vestibule is over a basement, and the two wings are slab on grade. So when all that plumbing gets renovated in the slabs, there's some impact to the existing floor. The canteen window has been unused for a long period of time. When we renovated this building last, it was in 2010 or 2009, and we created a gathering space for vendors outside of the building. Mobile vending is the trend that we see. It has a lot to do with financing of leasehold improvements. It's very difficult to achieve. Whereas if you get it financing on a mobile vending cart or a truck, it's usually provided by the supplier or the manufacturer. So typically, in situ vending is not done in common anymore. We've had this site actually identified for 2 years now as one of our call for proposals for mobile vending for food services, whether it's a creperie truck or a hot dog cart, and we have had no uptake. So that's the other issue that we're facing in a lot of our more remote park sites, is that there's just not enough traffic to sustain a business due to the cost and overhead of running a small vending business these days in comparison to what it might have been 40 years ago. People have more costs and more exposure, and they perhaps are not willing to work for less. That vending opportunity would continue on the site, but again, it would be off-site. It would be out of the building, essentially in the location where the canteen window currently faces. There's a large plaza that's been developed. So as you can see, the upper part of the canteen window is clearly one of the original openings. You can see the cut jam stones or the coin stones on the corner of the upper opening, and then the lower masonry work that was done essentially interrupted the rough ashlar, and not particularly skillfully done either, but the jamstones were not extended down. So we would reclaim that space with matching limestone and a matching sill to match the other openings. What we did find, which is very exciting, is that of that bay of what used to be the men's change area inside the current canteen space, which has long been dormant, is that we found the old original wood windows intact. A couple of the interior pieces will be repaired, but basically they're wooden and they just need a coat of paint and a scraping. So we're excited about reclaiming those and showing them off when we open up the plywood covers. So the Waterfront Master Plan, which is approved by City Council, identifies the use of public space along the waterfront for the display of public art. Part of the problem on our waterfront and public pathways and park systems is that all of the opportunities to display public art, with the exception of the Tet Center, are outdoors, and that limits the kind of public art you can install. We are excited about the idea of opening up the upper mezzanine area into a public art display space. Please disregard the chandelier that's identified in the center of the hanging space, but it's consistent with other policies that the city has been working towards, and we will be able to display public art in a way that isn't possible in four-season weather outdoors. So different kinds of art could be in this building, could be visible from the street and from the exterior, and of course from the interior foyer. We have had an interest from the Potters Guild to do some display work in here, and that could coincide with the development of this project. And it would be potentially a type of mosaic temporary public art space. What's interesting is the Potters Guild is celebrating their 50th anniversary, we believe, in the next season or two. And their first season, they actually programmed in that second floor space of the bathhouse. So they have a bit of an emotional tie and a history to the space. So the upper space is not feasible to be made accessible for public use and programming. It would basically eat up too much of the real estate in order to get folks accessibly up to that space, and there wouldn't be a lot of room left on the second story. The other issue for us, and this space has sat dormant for over 25 years, the other issue is for us is that it's a decentralized location, it's unstaffed, it's seasonal, it's prohibitive and infeasible to manage as a public usable space. We're not interested in the space as a storage space because there is a basement in this building. So as part of making the decision to abandon or open up the second story, we had to weigh that potential likelihood that it is most likely to be mothballed in perpetuity. And of course, that comes hand in hand with some challenges with quality of the interior building climate. We had to replace the upper windows in 2009, 2010. The upper windows are steel, and we replaced them because because of the way the air circulates in the building, they were corroding very badly. So they were replaced with like steel, but they're under stress due to being isolated in that upper space. The quality of the space is quite remarkable. It's extremely sunny and airy and breezy, and the public is very rarely ever seen the space and will very rarely ever get to see the space again. So we're trying to celebrate this, what would become a 20-foot high central atrium space, and make a great public space, demonstrate public art, be a bit of an indoor-outdoor park building beacon on the waterfront. And those are some fellows playing soccer. Thank you.
Great, very exciting proposal here. So this is part 5, so we go by the strict part 5 rules, right? So first of all, everyone had an opportunity to make comments through Dash. So the first step is, if you made comments through Dash, and the 3 of you did, were your comments accurately captured? And if not, now's your chance to point that out. Seeing none. So then we go to members of the public for comments, and to add any comments to the file.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Peter Gower, Kingston. Got 4 comments, and firstly, a really positive one on thank you, City and Neil, for the work that's being done here. One little comment, the city, in fact, did put money towards this building at the start. The 3 Richardsons all contributed, and it was not enough. So the city did have an original financial interest in it. Secondly, Neil, I'll ask a question, I'm not sure when it gets answered. What was the upstairs originally used for? And I don't know if we know. Thirdly, trees. Calbury, in the report at the back here, points out the wonderful views that there are. Of course, they are obscured by the wonderful mature trees, which the forestry group is trying to protect. And one of the problems around this building is that it's slowly gotten hidden by more and more trees. And I think at some point the city needs to have a talk with its own people and say just how many trees should there be, how much should they be trimmed, how visible should the building be, or do we wait for those trees to die and then not replace them, and that will lead to a further argument. The fourth thing which I suggest you might want to keep in mind, for the next 10 or 15 years, veterans from the Second World War are getting older and older and less able to easily attend the Remembrance Day ceremony at the Cross of Sacrifice. This seems to me an almost ideal place for an indoor ceremony, close to the RCHA and the Cross of Sacrifice, accessible, and a war memorial in itself. And I would suggest that you might want to consider that use for at least for a few years. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll go to other members of the public. At the conclusion of all the public's comments, any questions, staff will have a chance to address.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to Mr. Unsworth for the presentation. And it's a truly outstanding historical essay that's been prepared as part of the report. So I want to commend that. And my first point actually leads into that, looking at the sort of this particular building as part of the site in the immediate area seems to call out for more heritage commemoration material to be displayed so people understand the site better. And if we had that, maybe we'd see more people down there using it. So I was unaware of almost all of this until I read the report. So now it seems as if you're trying to graft modern uses onto buildings that are nearly 100 years old, and that's very commendable. It's very clever ideas. And I went to one of the earlier sessions on this. I think it was like last month, where they're talking about all the stuff they're going to do there, and as well as like with the shore and so forth. So it's all integrated together. It just seems to me that you're trying to do too much with what's a really small site, and that's actually holding you back from maybe some of the things that you could do, you're required to do certain things, right, as laws have changed. So it seems to me as if you would need a separate building. You keep the building that you've got, you do the best you can with it, and then you have other uses that you can put into another building that's nearby. So that's just the practical Frank speaking out. And the next point is one I raised before at the other meeting, and I think it fits in as well, maybe as part of the previous point, is you said the access to the second floor is problematic, right? You explained all that, and I understand it. It is a nice space up there. I've never been up there, but I like the views. And this is maybe a heritage, sort of a transmogrification, if is the right term. But you could expand the second story all across the width and length of the building. I don't know if you have a structural ability to do that with where the building was built, but that way you get around the inaccessibility and you create more space to do all the wonderful things that we haven't been able to do there because of the building has been falling apart or hasn't been getting its attention, or just lack of space or flaws in design. So I'm excited to see how this heads forward. It's a really important site, and it's a busy site in the summer, and it has been really busy in previous years, as we heard in the previous city session, which is also outstanding work, giving the background of this, waterfront master plan, recreation, heritage, all together. So I just want to pass on my best wishes for the project.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak to this proposal? Seeing none, I'll go to Mr. Newman to start off staff's response. Just keep in mind that for the purposes of this meeting, we are considering the recommendation. As you see, generally it's the Heritage Act related stuff. So internal use and any suggestions about different ways of using the internal space are not actually part of the recommendation. So you don't need to respond to those suggestions. But those points were all well taken and should be part of the larger conversation, but are not relevant to today's discussion, some of them. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, I'll look to my colleague, Mr. Unsworth and Mr. Leary, to see if they have anything to add, but I think your comments are on point with respect to the feedback that relates specifically to the alterations proposed. We've taken notes of the comments generally. I'm not sure if Mr. Unsworth or Mr. Leary want to speak to any of the alterations as they relate to the comments.
Yeah, I'll allow you to speak quickly, but just keep in mind that what we're deliberating is the external alterations. Go ahead.
To the points that were asked for clarification, I'm pleased to say that we have been in consultation with the Richardson family, who donated the funds for the original structure. So they are aware of the improvements that are being proposed and are in strong support of celebrating the space and bringing it back and improving it. Historical upper use of that Widow's Walk or lifeguard space may have been somewhat of an architectural approach versus an actual practical approach. There is specs on the original building structure, but again, it's been very dormant for many, many long years. Agree with the components of the tree concerns and the exterior of the building, and there's 2 aged Norway maples immediately in the front of the building that are not likely to last much longer, so that could be some good news for showing off the beauty of the building. And certainly part of the experience that we're trying to do is make this space a more suitable programming space for members of the community in and out of the space. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're at the point where members of the committee can submit oral comments to be added to the file. Yes, Paul?
Thank you, sir, for your submissions. My question is, in regards to the Indigenous urban community here, we're always looking for spaces where we do ceremonies. We actually are doing a water ceremony this Saturday at the Newlands Pavilion. What I'm sort of getting at is any new builds or new renovations, And I know there's a smudging policy sort of stalled at city right now going through. Is there any thought, without changing the heritage aspect, of making any of these places places that we could actually use for our ceremonies inside? And if it is not here, could I put it forward that be thought of every time you do a new build or a major renovation, that could be taken into consideration?
Staff, I'm sure, is taking note of these suggestions. At this point, we're just adding committee comments to the file, and we're leaving it at that, so that no response is required. And anyone else? Yes, Mac.
I think it's a great project, and I have been upstairs inside there because I was asked to submit a proposal for doing the original design on the building. And I think it's really unfortunate we can't get up there. I know it can't be made accessible, but unfortunately not everything can be made accessible. And I think it's a shame that upstairs is going to be mothballed. I just think I was up there and it's stunning, it's beautiful. It's just a great panoramic view. It is part of the initial design. There's probably some lawyers weighing in and some liability issues, is my guess. But not everything can be made accessible, but that doesn't mean that it should be cut off from everyone. And I think it's a great project. I love everything you're doing, but I think you should look again at not using that upper space. That's my comment.
Thank you. Councillor Schell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, we just passed the new accessibility guidelines for the City of Kingston last night, and if we own it, it has to be accessible. It's just across the board. But this has been really interesting to listen, because as a committee, with the built heritage component, we really haven't had any comments. What is so interesting is that the comments from the public are a hunger for the stories of a building like this, and a hunger for a way to give ideas about buildings like this, their use, their beauty, comments about sort of the glory of spaces like this in the city. And it's just interesting in that as a committee, with this tension we have between built heritage and the stories, we're really seeing more and more how important the stories are, and that this is a committee where people want to bring up the stories, the use, the beauty, not just the functionality and how the building is going to be repaired. So that was just a comment. I agree about the trees. That's been an interesting one. I thought they were fir trees, and then when I took a look at the picture, they are deciduous, but it is going to be an incredibly beautiful building. So I'm quite sure we won't be cutting trees, but perhaps trimming them to help show the building was a very good idea. Thank you.
If no one else has any comments, I would like to make a comment, so I'll pass the chair to Vice Chair.
Yes, you have the floor.
Thanks. My comment is as councillor for the district. Just to the trees, this often comes up when trees are involved. People think that removing trees is the only solution possible when a tree is obscuring something. Clearly, trimming trees is always preferable if the trees are viable. This happened at you'll remember with the willows at the Annandale. People were recommending just getting rid of them. Out of sight, out of mind, easy to deal with. Then there's not, but the tree canopy initiative has been endorsed by council, double the tree canopy by 2025. The jury's still out whether it's even possible. So obviously any kind of park trees that we have, if salvageable, should be retained. I'm sure I'm not telling the parks manager anything he doesn't already know. There is a way of opening up space without complete removal. Just keep that in mind. My other comment has to do with the canteen renovation. That is actually part of the application. So it's interesting because at the time that it was installed, so what we can see here in the story of the Richardson Bathhouse is actually the way that priorities change over time. So in the 70s, there was great use at the site for bathing. So that's actually, I remember that because I was a child. Richardson Beach was a beach, and the bathhouse was a bathhouse, and the canteen was a canteen for people that were at the beach, and it was a well-used area. In contrast to today, where it's essentially a relic or a ruin that has an interesting look to it, but it's really, I'll tell you, even from my own perspective as a father, my kids play on the Gaskin Lion, they play in the Newlands Pavilion, they run around the Murney Tower, on the hill, but they don't think anything much about the bathhouse because it's just sort of just there and it's not being used. So this is a study in adaptive reuse, how to restore something, add the modern uses, and then you've got adaptive reuse, and then you've got this the building used again, and its prominence will gain, and along with it, hopefully, with the rest of the waterfront development, you will have far greater use at the site and traffic, and then the need for a canteen again, which can be a mobile one. There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a good idea. The reason that the canteen was there in the 70s was because the people were there in the 70s, and they're not there now. So that's what this project really represents. It represents the restoration of Richardson Beach as a waterfront destination for the people of Kingston, and for that reason, it's very exciting. The use of the building, whatever it is, any use is going to be welcome. The overall approach should always be to be welcoming, to get people back down there. Just an example of someone from outside of Kingston maybe miscalculating the importance of the site in present day. They set up drop bicycles, a kiosk right there at the Richardson Bathhouse. And I noticed this when I went on a walk with my kids, and I was thinking, I wonder if anybody uses these bikes, because unless you knew to look for them there, you wouldn't find the drop bikes there. And that's how sort of derelict the site has become. And I'm sure over time they stopped relocating bikes to that location because they weren't getting picked up there, and their software showed that. So again, it's all to say that this entire site will change, if successful, will change the entire use of the waterfront by the public. And the washrooms, of course, are part of that. The change rooms are part of that. If you want it to be a beach again, you have to have those things. The accessibility requirements, unfortunately, are a feature of the 21st century. There's nothing we can do about it. It's provincial legislation. Often it's not compatible with heritage, the most interesting aspects of a heritage building, and I totally agree with Mac when he points that out at the second story. However, opening up the second story to the first story, so that and I believe that's what you were talking about, opening up so that it's a sort of like the malting tower at the Tet, a tall space where all the light comes in, and also to help exhibit the interior art. I think that's a good idea. All right, thank you.
I return the chair.
Any other comments for the record? Okay, so we will need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. It is that Heritage Kingston supports Council's approval of the following, and then there's the listing of the work with 5 points, and then the conditions, 5 conditions. It's mostly exterior masonry work. Need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Mac, seconded by Don. Any discussion? Then we'll vote. I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. Thank you very much. Good luck with this exciting project. So we have a heritage permit application for 320-322 King Street East. This is on Market Square in the old Market Square, what's it called? The Market Square Historical Heritage Conservation District. And the subject property is designated under Part 4 and Part 5.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, this application relates to the property at 322 King Street East. It's located just across Market Square on the west side of King between Brock and Clarence, and it contains a 3-story red brick commercial building constructed in 1869. This property is designated under Part 5 of the Heritage Act as part of Market Square Conservation District. This application has been submitted to request permission to install 3 gooseneck lights above each of the entranceways above 322 King in accordance with the city's masonry policy for heritage buildings, and the application also includes a request to install a new wall sign and a new mast arm sign above 322 King. The applicant has indicated that the gooseneck lighting will be LED with a bronze finish and will be installed above each of the entranceways, above the buff brick details, and within the mortar joints as far as possible, as per the masonry policy. The power will run from the base of the fixtures through the mortar joints and into the building, so there will be no conduits on the exterior of the building. The proposed wall sign and mast arm sign are sought to recognize the new business of a new tenant, with a new tenant, being Kingston Coffee House. The wall sign is proposed to be located above the entrance to 322 King East in approximately the same location as the former tenant's Coffee Co. sign, with the gooseneck fixture below. The sign will be 12 feet in length, 12 inches in width, and will be constructed with a naturally stained reclaimed barn board with black colored lettering. The mast arm sign will be wrought iron with swing chains and will project 2.5 feet from the building with a circular painted face constructed of wood and will feature the company's logo. The applicant has indicated that both signs will meet the provisions of the city's sign bylaw. This building, known as the Masonic buildings, have historic and associative value as examples of the work of local architect John Power. The property is associated with the Masons as it was originally a Masonic lodge, and this can be seen in the raised central parapet with the stone engraved Masonic buildings. The property has contextual value in its contribution to the evolved character of Market Square. Prior to the construction of this block, the property housed a Manchester warehouse, which was demolished in 1868 to allow for the construction of this building. The Market Square plan notes important heritage attributes of the district, including the views to City Hall, the cohesive, consistent 2 to 4 story scale and massing of the commercial buildings that line the market area, as well as the historic pattern of consistent ground floor commercial use. So this proposal will not impact the views to City Hall and will maintain the built form of the buildings as well as their commercial use. So there'll be no negative impacts on these attributes. This is an image of the proposed lighting to be installed on the ground floor above each of the doorways. This is an example of the sign been included as an exhibit to the report in front of you today. It would be one of these sort of bronze finishes that have been included. This is the proposed location of the sign, the wall sign. The images that have been provided are to give an idea of the reclaimed barn board and style of lettering. And this is the location of the proposed mast arm sign. So there's only one being proposed. I think there was some confusion in the technical circulation that there were 3 being proposed, but it's just the one. So this property is part of the commercial block. The design of the storefront is highly visible on King Street, and it's important from a conservation perspective. So this application has been reviewed against the Market Square district plan and meets the policies in that plan, policies and objectives. This application was circulated to internal departments, and their comments have been included as conditions of approval where appropriate. This application was also circulated to this committee. We received 3 comments with respect to this application. Two members noted that it would be ideal for the applicant to consider a larger signage plan for the building in its entirety, in contrast to adding signage as independent parts, to ensure that the signage didn't create an imbalance across the fairly uniform facade of the building. One member also suggested the applicant consider either installing a signboard along the first floor to accommodate signs across the entire width of the building, or installing 3 mast arm signs above each entry. So staff forwarded this to the applicant, who indicated that that they would consider this as suggestions, and they do have larger plans, larger signage plan moving forward, which they will work with the city on moving forward. One member also asked for clarification on the proposed application, and following that staff's clarification, there were no further comments received. So staff support this proposal, and upon review of the submitted materials, the proposed scope of work appears to meet all of the policies in the district plan, and staff support that scope subject to the conditions outlined in the report. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's again the Part 5 process. So, several of you put your dash comments in, and this is your opportunity to correct any inaccuracies. And if seeing none, then we go to members of the public to offer comment on the file.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very briefly, I think the sign as proposed looks really good. Color scheme, the sizing of it, lettering, no objections. All the best.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? Yes, please. Yeah. Yeah, just turn on your microphone. You can just say your name and you can go ahead.
So good morning, my name is Vidyut, and I'm the owner of Kingston Coffee House. Kingston Coffee House has taken over the premises or the coffee shop, which was formerly known as Coffee Eco. Coffee Eco has been at that location for a number of years and caters to a number of audience of the public, as well as people from our esteemed council here as well. There were a couple of points of confusion, largely stemming from my inadequacy as a graphic designer, given the time frame we had in order to submit the application. So obviously we understand that there's only going to be one mast arm sign. I just brought this in to show what it would kind of look like. So this one is a basic wood slice, and on that our logo has been etched. But in the actual version, the logo would be hand painted as opposed to this being just a vinyl thing. It will hang on through the mast arm sign, a single mast arm sign before 322, which is our premises. All the anchoring is in line with the Act, where we would use only mechanical anchors within the mortar, and not touching the bricks, covered with lime mortar. The other thing that we wanted to point out was we are using the same space which was used by the existing board for Coffeeco. Ours is a non-lighted sign, which also helps to cover some of the previous holes which were there because of Coffeeco's board being a lighted board. And it goes right up there in the brickwork, purely mechanical fixture as well. And I would be happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Thank you. So the way the procedure works is all members of the public get a chance to speak, and then staff gets a chance, and then members of the committee again. So it sort of have to take our turns. So if anyone does have questions, it would be questions to staff. But at this point, any other members of the public that wish to speak? No, seeing none. So, was there anything? Yeah, I don't think there was any questions to staff from the members of the public, so it would just be final comments from members of the committee to have them included at this time orally. I've got a short comment to make, so I guess to give up the chair again.
Right, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm pleased with the proposed use of the reclaimed barn board and the wood slice, because what that does, in my opinion, is tastefully has a contrast to the brick facade, and in a way that is not incompatible to the sort of heritage feel of Market Square. Maybe not everybody would agree with me, but I think it's a successful choice of contrast, and so I'm happy that it is sort of consistent with the Market Square feel, and I'm happy to advise council to support it. Thank you.
Return the chair.
Any other final comments? Okay, so we will need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. So that is that Heritage Kingston supports council's approval of the following. There is the work is actually described in the first paragraph. So said alterations to include the installation of 3 gooseneck lights, 1 wall sign, and 1 mast arm sign, and then subject to 4 conditions. Need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Paul, seconded by Catherine. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries unanimously. Good luck. Yeah. So I need to use the bathroom, so I'm going to call a short 5-minute recess, and we shall reconvene then. Well, I know it's the Christmas season, and socializing is very enjoyable. Everyone seems to be in a good mood, but we have a little bit more work to do. So our next item is designations, 965 Sydenham Road, 1572 Sunnyside Road, and 974 Sydenham Road. Always exciting when we have designations on every meeting, it seems like. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, this is 3 more properties that we're proposing to add to the register as designated properties. These were evaluated through the 2015 Culture Heritage Property Evaluation Project, as well as the 2011 Cataraqui Village Inventory and Evaluation. And they've all met the criteria under the Ontario Heritage Act for properties of heritage interest. So they include the Cataraqui United Church and Cemetery on Sydenham Road. This includes a good example of a Gothic Revival red brick church building with limestone detailing and foundation. The building's polychromatic brick on the front facade and vestibule, its buttresses and its large multicolored rose window are distinct features on this building. It was designed by the well-known firm Power & Son in 1881. The grave markers in the cemetery date back to 1809. It would include some of the early pioneer families in Kingston Township, and it's a landmark along Sydenham Road. This one, the full bylaw is in your agenda package. Staff met with the owners on this property, who I think still continue to have some concerns, however, have confirmed with us that they're not objecting to this designation. This is the Powley Farmhouse on Sunnyside Road. You may recall this property. It was evaluated a couple years ago. The Powleys were early United Empire Loyalist family who farmed and owned this property for over 100 years. It was recently severed from the Cataraqui Regional Conservation Authority lands, and it includes this early 19th century limestone farmhouse and what remains of a wood and limestone barn. I'm happy to report that the limestone barn is currently being stabilized and restored, and so we should be seeing plans next year for repurposing of that building. And again, these owners are happy or satisfied with the designation proposal. And finally, this is the Christ Church and Anglican Cemetery on Sydenham Road. It's an excellent example of a Gothic Revival limestone church. It was built in 1869. The bell tower and western addition were added in 1877, both to plans by Power & Sons. The Enkin Cemetery represents the traditional burial practices of the mid-19th century. It's a landmark along Sydenham Road. And again, staff have met with the representatives of the owners for this property, and they've confirmed that they have no concerns regarding this designation. The draft bylaws before you have been vetted through the Heritage Properties Working Group, who are supportive of them. And Mr. Chair, we feel that these properties meet the prescribed criteria, and we recommend that Council serve a notice of intention to designate. Should we get no appeals within the 30-day appeal period, that Council proceed with approval of the designation bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. So you'll see typical of the designation bylaw, the recommendation sort of always looks the same with the 2 clauses per property. So there's 6 clauses here, and they're all the same format with a 30-day requirement and the notice of intention to designate, all the same language. Need a mover and a seconder to get it on the floor. Oh, actually, sorry. Questions first for members of the committee. Yes, Peter.
Thank you. This is just for clarification. The last point in terms of the Powley farmstead mentions the remains of the one-story limestone barn which collapsed last year. It is part of this same, it will be designated along with the farmhouse. Am I correct in that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, he is correct, yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? So now we go to members of the public for comment. It's fairly straightforward recommendations. Need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Paul, seconded by Peter. Any discussion on the proposal to designate these 3 properties? Seeing none, we'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thank you. So now we have an interesting item. It's an update for the Heritage Grants bylaw, and it includes a recommendation to approve the current grant bylaw proposal.
Sorry, just one second. Okay. So thank you, Mr. Chair. This report does provide, it sort of builds on the briefing from the October Heritage Kingston meeting, presenting the update to the Heritage Grant bylaw and a recommendation of approval for that bylaw. So just really quickly, the Heritage Grant bylaw was originally established in 2005 with a couple of amendments. And it was intended to assist owners of protected properties financially with approved conservation projects. And it helps to ensure the conservation of cultural heritage value in Kingston. So the city has undertaken a review of this bylaw to assess its effectiveness, identify challenges and opportunities, particularly with respect to efficiency and an anticipated increase in the number of future grant applications. So this project, and to address some administrative updates since this bylaw is 12 years old now. So this project benefited from a comprehensive review with internal departments as well as comparative review with other municipalities. An online public survey, discussion with the Heritage Properties Working Group on an early draft, a public open house which was held in August, and also this briefing that was held with this committee in October. So just a quick overview for anybody in the room who's not familiar, the current program, how it works. Applications for eligible properties for eligible work are eligible to receive 50% of the project cost up to $2,000. Applications must be tied to a heritage permit, and they have to be submitted together. Both the grant and the permit applications must be submitted at the same time. Applications are received at the beginning of March of the year, and it's on a first-come, first-served basis. At this program, all grant applications are reviewed by Heritage Kingston, even if the permit is approved under staff's delegated authority. And I'll just note that the total budget for this program for this year was $36,000, and that's pretty consistent over the last few years. So the new program, there are four major proposals, four major changes that are proposed in this new bylaw. So the first would be to increase the maximum grant amount from the $2,000 to $5,000, with a limit for the use for certain applications for projects that are proposing modern materials. So those would be limited to $2,500. The second change would be to allow for previously approved work to be eligible, provided the approval was given in the last 12 months. The third change would be to move from a first-come, first-served basis to the creation of an application window that would be open at the beginning of the year until the end of March for staff to be able to assess all of the applications against each other. So you'll notice in the bylaw that there's a special provision for the 2018 year, which extends the window to the end of April, which is to address the timing of this bylaw being approved at council in the new year. And the fourth change would be to address situations where the total requested amount for grants exceeded the total budget. And in that case, applications would be ranked against a set of criteria in order for staff to be able to award the grant funding. And I'll just note that the total annual budget for this program, at least for the next year, I believe was approved by council, has been increased to the $50,000. So I just want to go over a little bit today the key concerns that we heard throughout this process. We've grouped them into about 5 themes, which relate to the application window, as well as the evaluation criteria and the potential, and those two sort of go together with respect to moving away from the first-come, first-served style and a lack of transparency in using criteria to evaluate and assess grant applications. Also, the extent to which approval should be delegated to staff, and the appropriateness of the increase of the single grant from the $2,000 to the $5,000, recognizing how this could limit the overall number of grants that are issued annually. And then finally, the appropriateness of the type of work that's eligible for grant funding. So the first theme, creating the application window and the evaluation criteria, I kind of want to go through those together. So members of the public expressed some concern with moving away from the first-come, first-served approach, as this could create a competition between owners, between properties, and also that the current approach places less strain on staff in terms of transparency and how those applications are assessed. The intent of the grant program is to provide financial support for the conservation of Kingston's resources, and that's based on the general tax base those funds come from the general tax base. So the window for applications supported by the criteria, the intention there is to ensure that applications have the greatest potential to that have the potential to yield the greatest public benefit, and those projects would be awarded funding over projects that that wouldn't, to the same extent, benefit the public. Kingston's this council has continued to make a significant commitment to heritage conservation through the designation and active review of heritage permits. So as the number of designated properties increase, so too the demand for limited grant funding. So staff have outlined 4 criteria by which to evaluate grant applications. So those criteria include projects that involve the maximum retention of heritage attributes, those that would provide a high level of public benefit or high level of contribution to the public's understanding of heritage conservation, projects where the integrity of the heritage property might be threatened, and then also in terms of strategically and making sure funding is distributed across the city, applications for properties which have never received funding before. So earlier iterations of the bylaw included weighting for this criteria, and members of the public expressed concern with including that in the bylaw itself, noting that it could be rigid and potentially limiting. So that has been removed from this draft. However, recognizing that the public would want to know how those applications would be reviewed, staff have committed to consulting with the Heritage Properties Working Group on developing a publicly accessible procedural document that would accompany the bylaw. So with respect to the delegation of the program to staff, there were some members of the public that were opposed to delegating the program, who thought Heritage Kingston should be consulted with respect to grant applications and thought the committee should be used as a bit of a conduit through which the broader public could be engaged on how heritage grants could be distributed. So the intention of this update isn't to remove the committee's role in providing advice for the permits that are associated with grant projects, or the transparency for how these grants would be awarded. So staff have committed to also reporting out the grant approvals through council, and as I mentioned, drafting the procedural document that would be available publicly, and also staff have also committed to bringing the final scores for all of the grant applications to the Heritage Properties Working Group for consultation as well. With respect to the increase in the amount per grant and the distribution of the total budget, members of the public and Heritage Kingston expressed concern with how this might result in fewer grants being issued annually, particularly if the program budget wasn't increased. So council has increased the budget. And then staff also reviewed the total annual budgets for grant programs in different municipalities. Those budgets obviously ranged. The maximum grant for those municipalities also ranged from about $1,000 to $25,000, but it was found that 5 was pretty much the average, and actually some municipalities were in the process of increasing that. So staff reviewed the applications from the last 3 years to understand which would have been eligible for the full maximum grant amount, recognizing that projects would need to be over $10,000 to reach that 5. And over the past 3 years, 25% of the applications would have been eligible for that full maximum grant. So staff recognized that this proposed increase, the $5,000, is a step in the right direction. However, have committed to reviewing the program periodically to ensure the grant dollars are being adequately allocated in a manner that yields greatest public benefit in relation to the adequate program budget. And then the last theme is the appropriateness of types of eligible work. So this came up at the meeting in October, as well as in the public open house in the summer, with respect to types of work that would be eligible for the grant program. So section 5.2 of the new bylaw presents more of a comprehensive list of eligible works. And then further in 6.1, the bylaw provides examples of projects that would not qualify for funding. So these sections have been critically reviewed to ensure that the work yields the greatest public benefit. So projects visible to the public, projects which demonstrate a high standards of heritage conservation, and those being appropriate for the attributes and the resource as a whole. Additionally, section 3.1 provides additional clarification on eligibility for certain works, which may not have the highest standards for heritage conservation, but could be necessary and appropriate for the resource. So this section provides for cases where an applicant could demonstrate that all other sections of the bylaw would be met. Staff could consider those applications that use appropriate modern materials. And in those situations, the applicant would be still eligible for 50% of the total cost of the work, but only up to the $2,500. At the staff briefing in October, suggestions were also proposed with respect to the application window, where members propose either to extend the window for applications if the requested funds do not exceed the budget, or to have a second window later in the year. And staff considered these suggestions, however, are of the opinion that the window, if it were to be extended, applicants could still be waiting until mid-summer for provisional approval. So with the proposed provision to apply for completed work, those who might want to apply late, or they could also apply in the following year. So as I mentioned, with respect to the delegation of the program to staff, at the meeting there was a suggestion to incorporate public input if applications were not brought to this committee in a different capacity. So staff have considered this suggestion and included a provision in the bylaw, which is section 8.3.1, to require consultation with the Heritage Properties Working Group on the evaluated scores in those situations where the criteria would need to be applied. And then as I mentioned, staff will consult with the working group on the creation of that internal procedural document. And then just a couple of additional minor changes following that briefing in October. Some minor modifications to the definition section with respect to designated property. And that was done in order to capture properties that also had heritage easements. So that's just been strengthened a little bit. The definition of landscaping has been modified to distinguish between general yard maintenance and cultural heritage landscapes or natural landscape features that have been identified as heritage attributes. The definition of guidelines has been brought in to capture the internal operating procedural document that's intended to accompany this bylaw. In section 5.2, staff have modified the provision to allow for the conservation of specific grave markers so that they could be eligible for funding as well. Section 7 includes some administrative changes, including the special provision to extend the window into April for the next year in 2018. So just to conclude, the proposed revisions to the grant bylaw, staff are of the opinion they strengthen the existing provisions and support the city's commitment to conserving cultural heritage resources. And as a significant number of changes were proposed to the original bylaw, it's recommended that 2005 Heritage Grant Bylaw be repealed and replaced with a final draft of the Heritage Grants Bylaw as attached as Exhibit A, for Heritage Kingston's consideration and recommendation to council. So I'm happy to answer any questions at this time. Thanks.
Thank you. Questions only at this point. Please don't stray from the questions until we get to deliberations.
Sorry, the first question is really a possible typo. I want to make sure I'm reading it correctly. Item 9.2, if it's possible to display that in the proposed bylaw, or people look at the bottom of, well, 9.2 at the bottom of page 287. Yes, it says notwithstanding section 3.1, and I wondered whether that should be 9.1, what is directly above there. Because it has to do with how much money you give to the applicant depending on whether the cost is equal to or below or above. And 9.1, well, it's written in a rather a way that I don't think is too clear, but I just want to make sure that 3.1 should be 9.1.
Yes, Mr. Newman.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the reference to 3.1 is correct. 3.1 sets out that ultimately the grants are up to 50% of the eligible works. So 3.1 is the accurate reference. 9.2 is giving reference to something that would be different than the 50% depending on the cost of the works.
Okay, I understand. Yes, all right, I'm satisfied on that.
So the way it would be contrary would be as if, because 3.1 talks about 50% maximum, right? So it's just saying...
It is not necessarily 50%.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other questions? Yes.
The other question, I think an important one, is you have revised the program proposal, the bylaw, so that there is some consultation with the working group. And I was kind of surprised to see that the working group is brought into this rather than Heritage Kingston. I mean, Heritage Kingston is a committee that has responsibility for reviewing applications, heritage alteration applications, and it's sort of carefully composed with a nominations committee and all that, whereas the working group is a less well-defined group with, I guess, more focused responsibilities, and who gets on and who doesn't is really not very clearly specified anywhere. So I guess I'm surprised, and so can you explain why you chose the working group rather than Heritage Kingston?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll start, and then perhaps Mackenzie or Ryan may wish to add. The rationale, at least as I can recall, is twofold. So one is that the Heritage Properties Working Group is made up of people with heritage expertise. And so part of the thinking is that we will work with the working group to define the weighting of criteria to be used in the evaluation of grant submissions. And so the working group itself will have a direct hand to play in setting those weightings. So that's one thing, is there's expertise at the working group to assist staff in making sure that we're comfortable with the way that we have scored submissions. The other thing is there's some additional flexibility in the way that we're able to arrange meetings and bring people to the table to have a review of the pre-scored applications. So those were some of the reasons for trying to leverage the availability of the working group. I'm not sure if you wanted to add.
So and just to point out as well, probably inherent to the suggestion is that the working group does report to the committee. So if we're talking about policy work on the weighting of criteria, so this is the intention of setting up a policy that staff follows a consistent set of, how to set the weightings. That discussion at a working group would still come to the committee in the report, and then the committee would have an opportunity, and members of the public would have an opportunity to comment on the policy suggestions that are coming out of the working group. Like, it doesn't cut the committee out of the loop. It just puts the actual work at the working group and the report at the committee, in my understanding. Is that correct, Mr. Newman?
I think that's correct. I guess the only thing I would add is the permits themselves, unless they're done through delegated authority, the permits themselves will be going through the committee. And I know we've discussed this before around the table, but the grants themselves, we've tried to be really explicit in the grant bylaw with the criteria that will be used to evaluate the grants against one another. We've typically dealt with them on a first-come, first-served basis, provided they're enhancing an attribute to the property. They, 99% of the time are awarded a grant. So we've established what I believe to be more rigor in this process for the evaluation, knowing that we're very actively designating more and more properties. So there will come a point when we don't have enough money to respond to the interest. So we've tried to establish rigor. We're trying not to establish unnecessary process, recognizing that the committee does have a direct opportunity in the review of the permits themselves.
Paul.
If you're going to start this in 2018, when will the public, you said public is going to have access to the criteria. Maybe I'm missing this. Is it the working group that decides the criteria, and when will that be posted so the public knows what the criteria is?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The criteria themselves have been defined and are found in the bylaw under Section 8. So the criteria there, what we hope to work with the working group on is establishing weighting for each of the criteria. And part of the reason we haven't established a process yet is that we want to get the first round of submissions in so that we can collectively review them with the working group in establishing an internal policy for subsequent years of review. So we have a draft that we are looking forward to sharing, but we haven't finalized things.
Okay, so now we go to members of the public for comment, questions on the proposed draft bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Firstly, congratulations on the depth of this, especially, and I was brought to 5.2 by Mackenzie's comment about grave markers, but I think the neat one there is 5.2D, which asks for clear documentary evidence, or clear evidence of missing items. That has been a real problem in the past, where people have said, oh, I'm sure they were there. I'm concerned about 5.2G, probably in the wording, which could lead to problems. The last part of that says, which are part of the original design. We're talking about cemeteries. And my understanding is that when a cemetery is laid out, there is nothing there, so there can be no original design. If you mean the mausolea, vault, stone walls, and wrought iron fences and gates on each plot, then I suggest you might want to reword that and make it a little bit clearer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gower. Any other members of the public?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also want to praise the exceptional work done by staff in the report. And I just have a kind of a quirky question. Could the city of Kingston apply itself for this program for improving its own heritage assets? I didn't see this discussed. Thanks.
So now, any other members of the public? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to say thank you very much. It's great to see how much consultation there has been on this very important bylaw, and also that the fact that it was well documented at the back of the report. So that's much appreciated. As you know, I'm with the Frontenac Heritage Foundation. We own a building in the downtown, and we have a concern about some of the structural repairs that might be done. So we look at it from a slightly different perspective than a lot of people. And so we struggle a little bit with some of the criteria. On one hand, it appears to say that if it's not visible, that it might not be eligible, and on the other hand, it says, I gather that if it's structural, that and might interfere with the protection of the heritage attributes, that it might actually, not be. So but anyway, I'm not going to quibble over that wording. I think what happens when you get a bylaw approved is you use it over time and you see what changes need to be made. I do have concerns about the fact that the authority is being taken away from the committee. I mean, I like the fact that it's being given to the Heritage Properties Working Group, but I think what you're seeing over time is that the role of that working group is becoming more and more important. And in fact, the city might want to consider expanding the number of people on that working group, because when you look at this kind of consultation, that is, I think, really important, and also consultation regarding designation bylaws like Kingston Penitentiary that's upcoming. Those are really important roles. So kudos to the city for doing that, but I do have some reservations about taking away that concern, that ability on the part of the committee to provide input in terms of the grants. Anyway, thank you and well done.
Thank you. Ms. Shirley Bailey, Frontenac Heritage Foundation. Any other members of the public? Okay, so staff has an opportunity to respond to points made.
Through you, Mr. Chair, with respect to the comment from Mr. Gower, 5.2G, if I can refer the committee to that. I'm just bringing it up. Yeah, so I think the important piece there, it says any conservation work that repairs, restores, or enhances specific heritage attributes associated with historic cemeteries and their features, such as mausolea, vaults, stone walls, wrought iron fences, and gates, which are part of the original design. So I think the important reference there is to the words "their features." So I recognize that when cemeteries are laid out, they may only be laid out with plots with people's name next to it, and so there's really not a tangible design component. But the intent of that is to refer to the features such as mausolea, vault, stone walls that have specific design elements. So if we, I think the interpretation is clear, but if we need to wordsmith it, we're open to that. To Mr. Dixon's comment about can the city apply for funding, I think generally we wouldn't, but we've made it abundantly clear in section 4.5. Designated properties owned by any level of government or institution which receives funding from any level of government are not eligible for funding, so the city wouldn't be eligible. And then to Ms. Bailey's comments, I don't think there's anything that requires a response. I'll leave it to the committee to consider that.
Just ask the committee's indulgence for 1 minute. I had to just going to run a wording over to Mr. Newman. I was just making a suggestion for the wording of 5.2G that if you just added of these features at the end of that, it would be clear that you're talking about the original design of the features themselves, Mr. Gower, not of the cemetery. Because you're right, the way it's worded there, it is ambiguous what the original design refers to. Yeah? Possibly also add a comma after the word gates. Okay, well, we'll leave it at that. It's in staff's capable hands. We need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation, which is essentially to pass the bylaw, to recommend that council pass the bylaw. So we need a mover and a seconder. Get it on the floor. Moved by Councillor Schell, seconded by Paul. Who wants to start discussion? Peter.
Thank you. I think there's a lot of work gone into this, and there's much of it which is to be, I think, is to be appreciated. There's one aspect, though, which I find myself distressed by. On page 275, it says, the intention of this update is not to remove the committee's role in advising on the projects with which these grants are to be associated, nor is it to remove the transparency in how public funds are distributed. I've read this several times, and except for that reference to this committee, there is no other reference in this document to the committee. And what that is doing is clearly, if not removing it, at least putting it in a very deep haze. And why is that important? It's important because this committee, we as a public body at this table, are the primary guarantee to the people we represent, the citizens of Kingston, that there's transparency in this. In removing even further than has already been removed, the responsibility of this committee for the oversight of heritage issues, you are just continuing, I think, to make a process in which the public ought to have a great interest. You're making it more difficult. And I find that, Councillor Stroud's notion that, well, it will be in here somewhere, not to be at all reassuring, because if in the elaboration of this there is no subsequent reference of this committee, when there's a reference of professional staff, there's a reference of working groups, etc., the failure to acknowledge any role for this committee, I think I think it's damaging to the ability of this committee to do its function, and I think that it's unacceptable. And I can't support the motion unless there is a willingness to address this issue, because we have had a role in this and it is being taken away from us, and I see no other really viable interpretation of this document.
Okay, who wants to go next? Councillor Schell.
Thank you. First question is actually to do with cemeteries. And just as we were having the discussion, I thought, who owns the features of a cemetery? I presume the family of the person, if there's a gate or a fence around the plot, the family owns it, but then eventually does the owner of the cemetery own it, especially if the family has kind of abandoned it? Is this one of the areas where grant applications can get very tricky?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the cemeteries sell plots to people. So there are plots within cemeteries that will be owned by a lot of different people. And if the owners are eligible for the funding, then we could get a lot of applications for grant dollars to support the upkeep of individual plots.
And I'm presuming, I've never seen one, so it's really not that important. An aspect I don't think I've ever seen one come across the desk. Anyway, that was just my first, and it was as we were discussing it, I crossed my mind. Now, during the earlier discussion, there was a comment about we will, as a committee, see the applications for not the grant necessarily, but the work surrounding the grant. I think that was the important part. This has to do with the grant program, not the application that originally comes forward to, say, rehabilitate a porch. And is that the point that might be getting a little muddy here? So if staff could just explain that. If somebody comes and they want to rehabilitate a porch or some windows, it's likely going to come here. I'm just waiting.
Sorry, staff is otherwise occupied. I just remind members of the public that they're not really, by procedural rules, supposed to interact directly with staff during the committee meeting. That there's plenty of time after the committee meeting to do so. Sorry, could you repeat your question, Councillor Schell?
Thank you. Is that the point, that we are going to, as a committee, receive the applications to do the work? It's after the application, or sometimes concurrently, because we've seen somebody wants to do work plus they've applied. But is that the major point that may be getting a little muddied here? This has to do with grant applications. The actual application for the work around the grant will still be seen by this committee. Could that just be clarified, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's correct. I mean, not to restate what you've said, but the committee is engaged in the review of the alterations, provided the alterations are supported through the issuance of a permit. That makes that work eligible for an application for the grant.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. I think this is an excellent document, and especially at the back, where obviously many citizens and groups got involved in comments, and that all the responses seemed to me to be very clear, and that in general there was great satisfaction. So I'm happy to support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine, you're next.
This is just to follow up on what Ms. Bailey was saying from the Heritage Foundation. It says specifically on page 293 that foundation work will not be eligible unless it can be viewed from the exterior. And this seems to me to put the cart before the horse in many ways, in the sense that if you think about the downtown core, there are many old properties, and they don't have basements, they have cellars. And the walls of those cellars are sometimes, because we're having water inundation, the walls of those basements, the cellars, are under more and more stress. So to actually be applying for a grant to, say, put new windows in, when in fact the most important thing to maintain and conserve that property is to ensure that the foundations are sound. To me, I don't understand it.
I guess that's a question to staff. Why?
A comment too.
Yeah. Do you want a response? Okay, so staff has an opportunity to respond.
I'm just trying to find, through Mr. Chair, the reference in the bylaw itself, just to clarify this. So during the open house we had at the HRC, a member of the public expressed concern that structural repairs ought to be contemplated and captured as eligible work under the grant bylaw because, as I think many of you will assume, that foundation work can be very expensive. And so every little bit helps. So in the review of a proposal for major structural repairs to a property, and again, part of the benefit of having these scoring evaluative criteria is that we can give weight to where the issuance of grant dollar will provide the greatest benefit to the public. So if you look at section 8.3 of the bylaw, it's the actual criteria themselves on page 287. If we were able to make the case that the structural repairs will help to provide the maximum retention of heritage attributes by perhaps preventing a building from falling down, then maybe it scores high under that criteria. And similarly, if it is a facade that has a public component to it and that it's adjacent to, like it's the facade of the building perhaps, then again, maybe it scores high under number 2 there, or item B, which is benefit to the public. So part of the benefit in having these criteria and with scoring that would be reviewed with the working group is that there's a bit of flexibility in how you look at some of these unique situations that perhaps ought to be eligible for grant funding. So there's not an outright prohibition against grants going towards structural repairs. It's more the way that we phrase the response to that comment in the comment response matrix in the exhibit.
Okay, so if I understand your response, foundation work could be eligible if, according to those 4 criteria, for example, criteria C, the heritage property may be threatened if the work is not undertaken, for example. That might apply to a foundation, or any of the other criteria if they apply for the structural work. It's not that it's ineligible, it's that it would need to fit into one of those criteria.
The only thing I want to make clear is the work itself has to contribute to the enhancement of an attribute. So unless you can draw that connection, repairs to foundation would be ineligible.
Sorry, just to follow up, what about then roof repairs in a similar situation? A roof repair would need to be linked to an attribute, and if it could show that the attribute is in danger, then it could be eligible?
That's correct,
yeah. Next I have Don and then Paul.
I guess as a follow-up, normally when we have a list of heritage attributes for a stone house, for instance, the stone walls is normally the first one on the list, and in some cases we mention the stone foundation. So certainly there's a good case to be made in many cases, but may not always be the case. That sort of leads me into what my situation is. I want to sort of follow up comments from particularly Shirley Bailey, who, as everybody has said, the staff have done a wonderful job in preparing this grants proposal. And there's been a range of different views, and they've weighed them all and come up with a kind of new scheme, which may or may not be the best, but it's certainly a good one, and I have no complaints or objections to that whatsoever. The other side of the proposal is the administration, and I have concerns about that. And going back to heritage attributes, the first item in the criteria is the maximum retention of heritage attributes. So what are the heritage attributes? That has to be judged, first of all. And I think it's important that this whole program be done to a high standard, and that means we need the best possible advice and knowledge brought to bear on an application for an alteration. And yeah, we have good staff, but we have good people, we have experts around this table and in the working group, and they should not be excluded. If we want to do if we want this program to work the way it should, we need the best advice, and excluding the committee and excluding members who are able to identify attributes is very important. And let me mention another thing. Many of the designation bylaws for our older and very important buildings have no list of heritage attributes. So who's going to decide which are the what are the heritage attributes? Which attributes are more important than others? These have all got to be weighed and balanced, and we need the best possible advice. And so I cannot support an administrative scheme that takes this committee out of the loop. Now, it may be, I'm willing to say that perhaps the working group is an acceptable route, because that group also is very much meant to be experts on the heritage attributes. That's what they're doing. They're preparing designations, and so they have to balance all these things. So I'm okay with the working group, but the way it's specified now, the participation of the working group is, I think, too vague to be adequate. And I think, it sounds as if the sort of applications will come to the working group after they've been sorted or preliminary sorted like that, in some sense. But I think we have to, the working group or whatever, has to look at all eligible applications, because it may be that some applications are simply misguided, and the attributes, they want to repair a porch, and it's not an original porch, so they have to make this, there have to be some sorting done early on. So I think if we're going to go through the working group has to see all the eligible applications, has to be involved in the evaluation, and has to make a recommendation to the committee or to the director. I'm perfectly comfortable with it not going to council. I think that's what delegated authority is where that's appropriate, because they're not, their business is not to look at into the nuts and bolts of these applications. So as it stands, I can't support the procedures for the evaluation. If staff are willing to accept or consider amendments, I'm prepared to try some amendments. It's going to be difficult to do that while we're, at this point in time. But that's where I'm going to state my position.
Thank you. Paul, you're next.
Thank you for this report. I think it's well done. First off, I like the clarification that us as a committee will still look at the repairs and to say, yes, this is how you're to repair the stuff and approve the permit. This is only for the application getting the funding. I do believe that the experts are at the working group, and they just come to us for a final review. So I believe that the committee is still involved. Will we let the working group with the experts there make those decisions? My only one is when we're talking about what's eligible and what's not eligible, there's two levels. There's the 5,000 and the 2,500. Would, per se, if someone was trying to fix their roof and it's not a heritage aspect, would they still be able to apply for the 2,500 because the rest of the building is heritage? Can the staff clarify that?
Just member of the committee just had a question for staff about eligible work. So maybe you could repeat your question.
My question was, we were talking about what's eligible is roofs or the base of the place eligible if it's not a heritage and it's not viewed by the public. But there is two levels. There's the $2,500 and the $5,000. Would someone be eligible to apply for the $2,500 because the rest of the building has heritage attributes, but because the part they're working on doesn't? So, for example, if they're working on a door that's not heritage attributes, they can apply for $2,500. Would they also be able to still do, say, for roof repairs or basements and that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The distinction between the eligibility for 5 versus 2,500 is more specific to the use of modern materials specifically. So I understand the point you're making is if it's not identified as an attribute, but maybe it somehow complements an attribute, could you be maybe eligible for the 25? That's not the way that it's been structured today. And Don had made the point earlier that some of our bylaws are out of date and the attributes are a 2-sentence description of the property. So right now, the way the grant bylaw has been proposed is that it's very specific to the attributes as identified in the bylaw. And so, again, there's some opportunity to say that although it's not the attribute itself, it contributes to the enhancement of the attribute, like the roofing example. Because if the roof is leaking, the whole building was potentially compromised. So we look at the relationship of the alteration to a defined attribute. So there is some room when we have really high-level bylaws to make the case, and there is flexibility in this bylaw to be able to do that. But the distinction that you're proposing is not recognized by the bylaw to be able to say that because it's not a specific attribute, maybe you can make the case you're eligible for 25. We just haven't built that into this.
Paul, did you have any further comments? Who has not spoken in the first round yet? I guess I'll take a turn then.
Councillor Stroud.
Thank you. So, mostly I'm in agreement with Vice Chair Don when you say how that all the work that's been gone into this and the consultation, and there's been some compromises proposed, there's been some solutions proposed. Overall, the bylaw itself is well thought out and an improvement. But there seems to be a sticking point amongst committee members about the fact that these grants will no longer appear on the committee agenda for us here at the committee, and what does that represent? So, in a nutshell, I'm kind of open-minded over solutions, as long as the solution there's conflicting priorities perhaps, but we need to find something that's workable. So, to me, the suggestion that using the Heritage Properties Working Group for the nuts and bolts determination of the weightings, which has not yet, the work that has not yet happened. Well, that work should have expert advice, and that work should also have public transparency. So the problem with the working group is that it, unlike the committee, it does not include members of the public in the same setting, and the meetings are not televised and so on. But at the same time, the committee's time is always pressured. We're under time pressure right now, right? Every committee meeting, it's the same. So to me, the compromise of having it go to the working group and any member of the public can join that working group, that's actually a plus because that means that if you have concerns over the work, for example, the way the things are weighted, or if you think after the first year you don't like the way the program has been applied by staff and you're a member of the public, you can join the working group and interact with staff in that work of the exact work, how the bylaw would be applied and how the decisions actually get made. I think that's really the question here, is the decision-making body. So is this committee actually the decision-making body for grants currently? I would submit that we're not, that we are the review body. We are like the Senate, we're the sober second thought body for the grant applications. And like Mr. Newman said, 99% of the time the grants get approved, because really all we're doing is we're ticking the box, is this heritage worthy? And if we believe that it is, then we approve the grant. It's noted that it's a problem when we get an application when the grant comes to us and the approval for the permit's already been given under delegated authority. That might be an issue, but that's not what this grant bylaw is addressing. This is actually the reverse. That problem is when delegated authority has granted a permit under the Heritage Act, and the question of whether Heritage Act approval always has to go through the committee, that's a different question. This particular piece, so maybe I'll just take a break with my comments there to ask a question. Does the Ontario Heritage Act require grants to come to the municipality's Heritage Committee?
No, it doesn't.
So this is a different situation. There are some legislative requirements, and the question of whether we should be delegating authority on minor approvals to staff for heritage permits is still open in my mind. But the question of whether we can set policy, I mean, we need to set a policy, and we can help shape that policy right here, right now, by making suggestions to staff about the draft bylaw. But a bylaw needs to be written, and it needs to be administered somewhere. And I'd rather have it in one of our working groups than not. And I'd rather have it in a place that's more flexible for meeting times, like was said. To me, it's a workable solution that at least is worth a try. And I would recommend to any member of the public that came to me with concerns about the way it's changed to join the working group and be directly involved themselves. And that way they can have a say on shaping the policy. This work is not done yet. This is the draft bylaw, even if passed, doesn't end there. What I compare to is this. I sat on the Arts Council grant approval body, and I believe Councillor Shelley, you have as well. So that is a citizen group that has a couple of councillors ex officio, and you deliberate a set number of applications that all have been submitted together, such as being proposed here, and you evaluate them in a closed session, and in the end, the grants are given according to what the Arts Council has decided. The councillors that are on that are not voting members, but they participate in the discussion. So we could set up something like an Arts Council for heritage grants. It would be, and that's kind of what this is, except that it's, instead of being a citizens group that is specifically proposed for the grant program review, it is a set of policies that's being written with the weighting issue being discussed with the working group, right? So I would say an alternative to that solution would be to set up another working group called the Heritage Grants Working Group that would only deal with grants, and there would be the decision body on the grants. And it would include staff members, of course, for administration, but the decision-making body would be members of the public. That may be preferable from a transparency point of view and public funds use point of view, but it might not be that different from what's being proposed here. I would submit that the Heritage Properties Working Group might actually function that way in this case if it is giving a set of logical weightings of ways to sort the applications. And that work we're not going to have. We're not going to know what that looks like until we get the first batch of applications. So no matter what we do, we have to try something. And I'm willing to give this a shot. I do not minimize any of the concerns members have brought up. I think that if Peter is correct, that transparency goes away and that the decision is taken out of this committee's hands completely and we have no say over the outcomes, then that is a bad thing. I agree with that point. So, but I'm not convinced that the administration of the solution is actually as dire as is being suggested, and I'm willing to give it a shot. But I also would like it to be reviewed at a future date. So that would be my final question. If this grant bylaw passes, and knowing that the first batch of applications will be the first 3 months of 2018, so that'll be the first sort of pilot project of the new bylaw. At what point would we get a report, and would the report come to the committee, and would there be opportunities to update the bylaw at that time?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure I understood the question. It's at what point would we come back to review the efficiency and effectiveness of the bylaw?
Yeah, so at what point would we have a review of the new grants bylaw, basically? And would there be opportunity for the committee to make further submissions in the future once some of its members who sit on the Heritage Properties Working Group might have a chance to actually do some of that work?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we haven't built any sort of review clause in the bylaw itself. We also haven't suggested one as part of our recommendation. However, if that were something that the committee wished us to do, I can sort of envision an amendment to the recommendation to require that staff come back to the committee to report on the effectiveness of the bylaw, perhaps a year after its implementation.
Thank you. So I guess what I'm suggesting is that we build in a pilot project type of clause that allows this to be tested and not necessary, and then it can come back for review. I know that the overall functioning of the committee is also under question, and there's a motion coming up later on the agenda from Dawn about a review of the actual committee's work. But I would submit that we need to try something out. This looks like a good thing to try, but if we recommend that it passes and it's final and it doesn't have a review clause in it, we may be losing the opportunity to revisit it at a future time, and it would take a motion of council to reopen it. I guess I'm not going to make an amendment myself, but I'll throw it back to members of the committee to see what other people think about that. Thank you.
Sorry, you have the chair.
Thank you. And now I recognize Paul.
I guess to move this on, I like that idea. I like just so that we could see what happens after the first. So I would be willing to make an amendment to say that after the first year, city staff would come back to this committee and we can have a report on how it ran and what our options are from there.
So there's an amendment being proposed that would add to the single recommendation here. The recommendation itself just says that it be recommended to council that the bylaw as amended be repealed and replaced with the draft A, so the new draft bylaw. So this would be a second clause, I take it. And do you have that written down, James? Just read back what the second clause would look like.
So James, can you put it on the screen?
Sure.
Okay, actually, we're going to take a short recess. Paul, you'll have a chance to write out your amendment, make sure we get the wording right. And also, I understand staff might have another piece of the puzzle to propose that's not in the draft bylaw. We got something? Yeah. Maybe you can tell us what you've got there, James.
So for clarification, the proposed amendment is to add 2 additional clauses to the main recommendation. The first clause being that staff come back after the 2018 grant application year to give a report on the process and allow for a chance for Heritage Kingston to review and offer suggested updates. And the third clause would be that staff be directed to bring a report to the Heritage Kingston Committee in the event that the scoring criteria are applied in the review of grant applications.
Just typing it in, the first clause is basically what I suggested about a review after the first year, and the opportunity for this committee to make changes. That's important. So that's the first one. And then the second one, once he's typed it in here, so if I understand it, it is there's no guarantee that we will have enough applications in the first year to require a scoring criteria. Is that why? Okay. So there may not, the scoring criteria will not be applied if there aren't $50,000 worth of grants that are applied for, right? But if they are applied, that means somebody's lost out. And then that's what the second clause addresses. So that's moved by Paul, seconded by Megan. So, well, I'll just start things off because I'm thinking about it. Basically, the first clause I'm happy with. That was my suggestion. That's what I would like. And I think a periodic review of any new policy is a good idea in general. And this allows us to move forward, not backwards. That's great. So I'll support the first one. The second clause is important because it highlights the fact that the scoring criteria may not always be necessary, but we're hoping that it is, because it's a good problem to have too many applications, because that means you're getting a lot of uptake in the grant program, getting a lot of work done on heritage buildings. So, and the competition will actually in itself should make heritage preservation happen more quickly, because it becomes something that, I don't know if it adds status or you can tell your neighbors about it, but if you get a heritage grant and they're not always given, then you could say, well, my work was so good that it got a heritage grant, right? It might add a little bit of incentive and help spread the word on the importance of heritage preservation, which is really what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to support both clauses of the amendment, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the rest of you have to say. Thank you. And I guess I take back the chair. Who would also like to speak to the amendment only? Councillor Schell.
I can support these amendments. It doesn't turn it into a pilot, it turns it into something that needs a report back, which makes perfect sense anyway. I did have a cheeky response that, if we get so many applications, maybe council should up the budget instead of having to score everything against, because, as I say, we have a very heritage-friendly council. So I'm happy to support these two amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Paul, you've got the last word on your amendment. You've said, unless you've said everything? Okay. So we'll vote on the amendment only. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Now, back to the full recommendation. So it now has 3 clauses. The first clause is that the bylaw be, that the new draft bylaw replace the old 2005 bylaw, and then the 2 clauses we just passed. Any further discussion on the amended? Councillor Schell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Some really interesting things have come up during this discussion. One comment made a repair on a porch, and I just made a note to myself. Remember, only if it's an attribute. We're not doing anything willy-nilly here. It's if it's an attribute. Another comment has come up about designations. And so I pulled out the 3 that we're doing today, and every single one of them has the roof as an attribute. So our current designations, which this council is pushing through left, right, and center, which is wonderful, the comment came that we do not have up-to-date designations for some, well, quite a few buildings, the old designations. So I wonder if staff have an idea of how some of these updates are going. Are there some in the works that we would see, so that when we get to these grant applications, there isn't so much confusion. Is there a response?
Through you, Mr. Chair. To be honest, I believe most of our efforts have been forward-focused. We haven't actually prepared a strategy to go back and look at some of these bylaws. I think it's something, though, that we can look at and bring to the working group, perhaps to establish a strategy for doing some updates.
Great. I think that it's becoming important as it keeps coming up. And just a comment, again, that I've mentioned a number of times. There's a motion later that we're probably not going to get to as quorum is getting iffy. We are an advice group. We are not a bunch of heritage professionals. None of us have degrees. And in the long run, I, as a councillor, rely on the professional staff of the City of Kingston, because when a decision is made, they're on the line, their professionalism's on the line. I get to walk away. If I've made a mistake, I'm okay, unless it's a conflict. But in general, I rely on the staff of the City of Kingston, because we don't, in our committees, ask for professional heritage experts, professional museum experts with degrees. We ask for citizens with knowledge to advise. So I just keep that at the top of my mind all the time. Staff have a big stake in this being done right, that isn't as big as me in some ways. I love the city, but when it gets down to the nitty-gritty, I need staff and their professionalism, and I rely on it very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Don, you're next.
I'm comfortable with the amendments, but I still can't support the main recommendation for the reasons that have been mentioned. I don't think it meets the standards that we should expect for transparency, for responsible administration. Basically, the Heritage Committee, in the sort of preamble to all this, there was a lot of discussion how there were some difficult disagreements or concerns when grant applications came to the committee, and the solution seems to be don't bring them to the committee, and then there won't be any embarrassment or any problems. That's not the way the city should work. We think heritage is important. A lot of people think our heritage is important, and we want the best standards possible. The whole principle of the Heritage Act was to bring a committee, the Heritage Committee, into play, and that committee represents the community. It also provides expertise in historic architecture, the history of the city, in building, heritage building construction, architects, heritage architects. Those qualities are generally not found on council. They're not found in most senior administration levels. It takes years of experience. It takes, we have people on the committee who have lived in heritage houses, renovated many heritage houses, and there's no substitute for that kind of experience. I don't think we should throw it away and put all the pressure on a couple of staff heritage officers. So I can't support the proposal.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to comment on the amended recommendation? Yes, Paul.
I'm hoping with the amendment that was approved that we can move forward with this. Is it perfect? No, but that's what we can do, is we can actually review it in time. I think it's a great start, and I can approve. I can vote for this. I think it's a lot of work for the staff, and like Councillor Schell says, they're the ones that are in line, as well as City Council. We just offer our guidance. So I always look for city staff for their approval. I also, for the built heritage people, I asked for their guidance too. But I do know that it's the city staff that are the ones that are ultimately responsible.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. I'll call the question on the recommendation as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. All right, well, we're running out of time with quorum, I know that. If we lose one more member, the meeting is over. So we'll just keep moving here. We've got the working group reports. Heritage Properties Working Group, Cultural Heritage Working Group, Heritage Assets Working Group. They're all in the package. The two of these were in a joint meeting, so there's actually only two reports. It's the one report.
Could I raise a question of privilege? I don't know what it is, but if we can leave the discussion of those things and go on to motions, we might be able to get those on the floor before some of us have to leave.
Okay, we can't alter the agenda, but what we could do is just quickly vote to accept the working group reports with no discussion, and that would save time. Does anyone want to move that? So moved by Peter, seconded by Dawn, that the two reports, the one Heritage Properties Working Group report and the one combined report of the two other working groups be received. Yes, Councillor Schell.
I'm not sure what this is a point of. I do have a question, so I would like to know that we could bring it up at the next meeting. If we receive the report, it's kind of over.
Okay. The clerk is saying that perhaps if we could, even though we could pass them, you're right. If we defer them to the next meeting, then we'll have an opportunity for comment at the next meeting. So there's a motion on the floor to defer the working group reports to the next meeting, January. The rationale you've sort of already said, so that you can comment. The debate is only to place and time, so what time are you suggesting?
The next Heritage meeting.
Okay, so that would be January 2018. I need a seconder for the deferral. Seconded by Megan. Any discussion on time? Seeing none, we will vote on the deferral. All those in favor? And that carries. So that's deferred. There's an update regarding emergency approvals. Raise your hand if you have anything to say about it. And then there's two new motions. The first one was moved by Mr. Taylor, seconded by Mr. Carl. Proposed motion regarding Preserving Canada's Future, the Foundation for Tomorrow report. Whereas the Federal Committee of Environment and Sustainable Development has studied heritage preservation and protection in Canada and issued a report, that is Preserving Canada's Future, the Foundation for Tomorrow, which makes significant recommendations on strengthening protection for Canada's heritage buildings and places, and whereas the recommendations relating to protection of designated heritage properties, federal heritage properties, and the identification and protection of Indigenous heritage sites in consultation with Indigenous communities are particularly important for the City of Kingston. Therefore, be it resolved that Heritage Kingston recommends that Council direct staff to study the report and develop a city position. It's moved by Mr. Taylor, so Don, you get to go first.
I think it can be brief. We're not really entitled, I think, to discuss the report now, but I think as a committee of the community, we have the scope to bring matters of importance to Council. And so this is just to ensure that Council addresses this report and hopefully asks staff to study it and develop a position.
Does anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Schell.
Yes, my first question is about the standing committee. Is this a group of politicians? Because Mark Gerritsen is on it. So that's my first. Is it, literally, is the chair, Deborah Shute, the vice chair is Honorable Ed Fast, Linda Duncan, are those all members of political parties?
No, my understanding is that a lot of them are heritage staff or well, consultants of the federal government. So
well, that's other members of Parliament who participated, but the other names. So it's a mix, then, I take it, you're telling me. Okay, and it's a report that makes recommendations that the federal government introduce legislation to provide, say, statutory protection for federal heritage buildings. What I'm getting at is, it would appear to me realistically that we don't ask our staff to develop a city position, that which would mean basically a position that they are recommending to council to take, that's not what staff do. That's not their job, especially if it's a political, a group of, even if it's a mix. I don't know how the federal government works. So maybe their standing committees are a mix of politicians and experts. I simply don't know. It's a report that makes recommendations. It's not a finished report then. So we would be basically asking staff to create a position about a group of recommendations made by a group of politicians and experts. And I think that's totally unfair to city staff. So I'll ask, I guess I should ask, but as a politician, it just seems like a huge, I don't even know if we can do it, basically, request.
So the question, staff, who would like to take that? Commissioner Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So my understanding is that this particular proposal looks at regulations that would apply to federally owned properties, which means that in that case, the city has no jurisdiction. And to be quite frank, I'm not sure from a staff perspective or even from a council perspective how we can tell the federal government what they should do with their own properties. Politically, that's definitely something that councillors may wish to do, but from a staff perspective, I don't think that that's something that, that we're in a position to become political advocates.
Just as a follow-up, I think it's out of order. I think it's actually an impossible motion, but.
Thank you. I was just imagining the opportunity of debating Mr. Gerritsen on about heritage buildings. That would be fun for me personally. But anyways, Megan, you're next.
In the archives world, like the Archives Association of Ontario, we have a committee, an advocacy committee, where the community is invited to provide commentary on a working document such as this. And so I think that that would be the venue for asking for commentary, not necessarily this the city staff at this point.
Yes, Paul.
One reason I second this motion was in there they talk about Indigenous heritage sites, and of course that's not buildings and it's not anywhere one federal site. And we do know that within the city of Kingston there is Indigenous sites, so that's where this may be relevant for the city staff. But I do understand politically how you can't tell federal how to do federal heritage sites, but could Indigenous heritage sites fall under this as a review? It's put this on the city's radar, so this is good, but could it be just a review to see if that's a portion of it?
Thank you. Maybe I'll just take this opportunity to ask another question for clarity. If this recommendation from us does not go to council, now that staff knows about the Preserving Canada's Future, the Foundation for Tomorrow report, without any direction from council, what would staff do if anything, about this federal report?
So, Mr. Chair, we would definitely, I think, what we would want to do is make sure that we are well informed as to what's happening and report that information back. And also ask if there are any venues for the public to be involved or for input to come through different associations that may be better positioned to provide or have a bit of a role in terms of advocacy.
Okay, so actually I think we're very close. I don't think we need to scrap this or get into a controversial debate about this, because there's only one clause, and it's that directs, that we're recommending that council direct staff to do what? To study the report. Well, that's a good idea. They've already said they would study it anyway, but sometimes it's nice to have it in writing. And the problem, I think, is the last 4 words: develop a city position. Although the city position could be enter a conversation with the federal government about the implication to the Kingston sites, and that could be our position, it doesn't necessarily, it suggests that we might also think of developing a position that might be at odds with the federal government, which some people would find very controversial. So maybe we could just change the wording so that it actually is something that we know for sure staff can do and ought to do, rather than suggest that maybe staff might have to take a political position, which is, as Councillor Schell said, not their job. So the council directs staff to study the report, comma, and report back to council with recommendations. That way it doesn't, the recommendation might be, well, it's whatever staff comes up with after studying the report, right? I'm not going to make that amendment, but I'm just saying if there's a way that we can remove the suggestion that we're asking staff to take a political stance, and then we can salvage the motion. Does anyone have any ideas? Councillor Schell.
I have no idea how many of this kind of report there is out there. The report talks about these recommendations coming from the year 2007. So this is a committee that's been studying these issues at least since 2007 and maybe more. So I'm very uncomfortable as a councillor saying to my fellow councillors that we direct staff to study this report. How many are there? I mean, it just, if we want to even say anything, it would be something like Heritage Kingston suggests to council that this is a very good report for staff to look at. We can't direct, I don't believe, the City of Kingston staff to study a report. I mean, we'd have to have a hell of a justification for it, and that it's, you know, timely, important, moves something forward. And again, it doesn't. It's a report that's part of a package that's been around and discussed for years to do with federal buildings. I agree with Mr. Carl that a major item that we're interested in as a committee in the stories of Kingston and Indigenous sites and Indigenous communities is really important. But this study doesn't really focus on that. So I just can't see that it's something that we should be moving forward to our council, and that then Councillor Stroud and I have to explain why we would be directing staff on this one particular report without some incredible backup information.
We'll continue the debate and expect this to be so controversial. Go ahead, Don.
Yes, I don't know the whole political history of this, but in releasing this report, which they've prepared very quickly, just in the last 2-3 months, it's a huge report, so I assume they plan to go somewhere with it, and I assume in releasing it, they're hoping for feedback from, particularly from constituencies and institutes that are, to which heritage is very important. And I think the City of Kingston is one of those, is an important player in the Canadian history. So it's perfectly reasonable for this city to be aware of it and be ready to comment. I wonder if Shirley Bailey might have some information on how this report is being distributed and what the federal government, or at least the writers of the report, want to receive in return. Because
yeah, okay, before we go to members of the public, I see the Director of Planning would like to say something.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So I just spent a little bit of time reading the press releases, and I've just read the press release that was put out by the minister responsible for this report. So what it indicates is that, there are a lot of recommendations, and a lot of them are at a high level, but what the government, the federal government, is committing to is a process going forward that would involve consultation with different stakeholders. Municipal governments are specifically indicated. So there will be a process where the federal government now looks at the recommendations and tries to determine what they feel are, the most cogent ways to move forward with an implementation strategy. And it specifically references that municipal governments will be engaged in that process. So I think it's something that, from a staff perspective, we can keep an eye on it, and certainly bring information back to the committee if and when the municipal engagement strategy is put forth by the federal government, and there are, opportunities that are developed with respect to our feedback and specific policies or legislative changes that may come as a result of the report.
Okay, so what I'm hearing then, Dawn, is that staff has every intention of studying this report and may well be coming back to this committee with an update once they've consulted with the federal government, because the federal government is seeking consultation. I guess that leaves me to believe that maybe the report, raising the awareness, whether we pass this or not, you raise the awareness about the report, so that's good. Whether we need to pass this on to council or not, it really depends on, I think, whether we need to further raise awareness at council about this report. Because what the Director of Planning just said is that staff would likely have something to tell us about this report in the future once the consultation has taken place. I guess that, yeah, so the question is, what does the motion really add in light of that last response?
Well, given the assurance that staff are aware of the report and will be will be passing on comments about it, I'm satisfied, and I'm willing to withdraw the motion if Paul agrees.
Okay, so seconder, are you okay with withdrawing the motion? Okay, so motion has been withdrawn with consent of the mover and seconder. Thank you. It is now 1:12. We've got one more new motion and then just a couple of items of correspondence. So this motion, you'll recall there was an earlier version that was withdrawn, but this is a new motion now. I'll read it out. Proposed motion regarding review of Heritage Kingston, moved by Mr. Taylor, seconded by Mr. Goheen, whereas the Heritage Kingston Committee has been operational for more than a year, and a review after a year was contemplated when it was established, and whereas members of the committee, the public, and community heritage groups have expressed concerns about the functioning and effectiveness of the committee's operations, therefore be it resolved that Heritage Kingston recommends that City Council establish a working group to undertake a review of the composition, mandate, and procedures of Heritage Kingston. The membership of the working group would be recommended by the nominations committee and would include a heritage staff member, preferably 2 members with experience in built heritage from current or previous municipal heritage committees, a member with general cultural heritage interests, a member with experience of civic museums and collections, and a member of the public. The working group would submit recommendations to council within a year from its establishment. So, Don, it's your motion. You get to go first.
Well, I'm very sorry, of course, that we're down to a bare bones of the committee, and it would really be better if we had something like full membership. But we're here, and I think might as well try to go ahead. So I'll briefly try to cover the main issues. I gave a presentation a couple of meetings ago, and just to remind people of that, essentially the problem is this committee is not working very well. I think members of the committee, many members of the committee feel that way, and members of the public that are interested in heritage activities are also concerned about the committee. The first problem is that essentially all the business of the committee is built heritage, and we only have a small number of people who are actively involved in that. And that means that participation in DASH, I mean, there's an exercise where we're supposed to contribute to staff's recommendations and review, rather staff's review of applications, and it's really been very minimal. Likewise, visits to heritage buildings for reviewing applications, very important, and very few people are coming to those visits. So basically we have a serious imbalance in the business of the committee and the structure of the representation of the committee. There are other concerns about procedures that members who are interested in and knowledgeable about built heritage are finding that they're not hearing about many of the applications. A lot of the applications are being settled by delegated authority, and even when the alteration applications are major, the delegation procedure is meant for minor alterations, and they're being applied for almost anything. And I used a couple of examples. 7779 Gore Street, an old stone building which has been gutted inside and out, being repointed, rebuilt inside, new porch, new doors, new windows, dormers, rear addition. The committee has never heard about it. So again, for those of us, for members who want to, they're on this committee because they want to help save and improve built heritage, they're just not having any involvement, and they'll have to ask why do they come, why should they serve on the committee. For other areas of cultural heritage, there's very little business here, and so these meetings are not going to be of much interest. It'd be great if, and some of them have been getting more and more interested in the actual business that comes to the committee, and that's great. I mean, I don't think the committee, I'm not suggesting, nobody's suggesting the committee should be entirely composed of built heritage people. There's always been a broad range of interests, but it's always been understood that the main business of the committee is built heritage, and we can't Yes, all right, we can't really proceed otherwise. So it's not good for the members. I don't think it's good for staff in that they are put under a lot of stress to make decisions which really should be coming to the committee. One of the advantages of committee, if people come and say, why do we have to do this and I don't want to do that, and who are you to tell me what to do, they can say, well, it's not us, it's the committee. And they must be under tremendous pressure in a lot of cases, dealing with applicants who are reluctant to do good things for heritage. And it's also not good for most of the owners in the sense that they have relied in the past on this committee coming on site visits, talking over their applications and giving them advice. And the direct interaction between owners and members of the committee, I think, is very important, and we've lost that.
Thank you, Don. Does anyone else wish to speak? Well, Councillor Schell put her hand up first, so I guess, unless you want to let Peter go first. Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Thank you. I'm pleased to second this motion because I think that I wouldn't disagree with anything that Don has said about the challenges which the committee faces, but an experiment was undertaken over a year ago of putting two committees together, and there was an expectation at that time that that experiment would be reviewed. And so I think that what is being proposed is nothing exceptional. It is that an experiment be evaluated after a time period of its implementation, as was anticipated in the first place. And there are some, as Don has said, there are some important matters which have arisen and need a review, but the review itself is fundamentally routine, I think, and it's in no way exceptional. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I see Paul now. Is it okay to let Paul go too? Go ahead, Paul.
As in our last motion we just did, I'm all for reviewing to see how we're doing. And stop me if I'm overstepping my bounds here, but I do take a point that it sounds like the non-built heritage people have no place here, and the non-built heritage people don't care for built heritage. I've sit on this committee for a few years now, and I look towards the built heritage people to give me advice, but when I first got to this committee, I was told I was a citizen, and citizens are here to give advice. I'm not an expert in built heritage, but as Councillor Schell did say, more and more people are hearing the stories and want to hear the stories, and a piece of stone is just a stone if there's not a story behind it. So I do take, sort of insult, if you want to say it, that the non-built heritage people are not valued here. I'm for review, but I'm also, the last meeting we did have, and this motion come up, then it was removed, we don't have everybody here, and everybody should have this voice, because this is the committee they sit on. So I do believe that we should look at possibly waiting till we have the whole committee. I'm not ready for a deferral yet. There may be something else come up, but I think everybody should have a voice for this. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Schell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the misconceptions is that, as Paul said, he's been on this committee for a number of years because I think it was 3 years ago we changed the committee to include culture and heritage. Yes, it had been a built heritage committee, but we started to expand based on the culture plan to include culture and heritage. And then a year ago, what we did was add museums. So yes, we combined with museums, but 3 years ago, we had already said we will be culture as well as. And then when the committees combined, we created a new way of doing things, aligned with the fact that Part 5 designations, we hadn't understood that we weren't doing it correctly. Whether or not that's still an argument, we have now got a new way of handling Part 5 designations. And the applications for change. So what I'd like to do is go into the motion a little bit again. I find it an odd resolve clause because it basically says a review of the composition, well, that's the membership, the mandate, so that would be citizens reviewing the mandate of this committee, and procedures. And I know we've had these discussions about Part 5. So it's quite a large review that you are asking citizens to undertake. That includes, so I will start with some of the questions. You're asking that it include 2 members with experience in built heritage form. How do you see the nominations committee interpreting that?
I would assume that they would be looking for members who have served on this committee, or even perhaps in another municipality. So they know what a heritage committee, what a LACAC, if you like, the original kind of thing is.
Okay, so that isn't actually what it says. The membership of the working group would be recommended by the nominee. Would include a heritage staff member and preferably 2 members with experience in built, from current or previous municipal heritage committees. So it's, so you want people who have been on this committee or are on it now or were on it with built heritage experience. So the only people you want from this committee or from a previous committee are people with built heritage. You don't want anyone from this committee or the committee of 2 or 3 years ago who has museums or cultural experience.
Well, there's certainly nothing to exclude other members.
But you're not directing
no,
the
not directing
nominations
that.
committee
Yeah, no.
to that. So
No,
you're
no.
really already directing the nominations committee in a certain direction for their final answer. I would just suggest. And then you've got a member with general cultural heritage interests. How would you expect nominations to interpret that one?
Exactly the same way as they did when they put members on this committee. Look at their resume.
So you would look at the mandate, because the mandate actually has the list.
Sorry, I just want to point out that the back and forth you guys are having, while fascinating, is not actually permitted under committee guidelines.
I should be going through you. I apologize. It's because it's being by a member of our committee. It's an unusual motion because it's a member of our committee. So I'll leave it at that. That's how I feel. It's already directing the way that this nominations would find the committee. Another question would be if we could find out how this committee, if it passed, would review these items. I would ask you to find out how the committee would do their review.
So is that a question to?
Well, it would be to Dawn, or to
Right.
the mover. In what I've put down to myself is how would they do the review? By reading the minutes, by interviewing members of this committee and previous committees, by interviewing people who sit and observe the committee, because basically the functioning of this committee, for the general public, they have no idea what we do. So if you have members of the general public who haven't been members of the committee, and it looks like we would have some because there's only 2 prescribed previous members of the committee, how would the general members of the public do a review, in the opinion of the mover?
I don't know if that's a question for the mover because it is City Council that would be establishing the working group and the nominations committee that would be populating the working group. So the procedures and methods of the new working group wouldn't really be up to Dawn, I don't think. So I guess the question, it's a valid question, but it doesn't have anyone here that can answer it. Did you want to keep going?
I think it's a rather important question because it leaves this whole thing hanging. Somebody doing a review or a group doing a review that we don't know how they would do it. Because another thing that will come up is if this review is undertaken in a way that costs money, council has to direct a budget for it. So how the review would be undertaken would require a budget if it involves any outside engagement. If it's within the little group, then that's one thing. And by the end of it, when you read this review, why couldn't we as a committee do our own review? Because it's basically the same thing. You've got members of the committee with Built Heritage, you've got a staff member, and then people that are already on the committee, except we're asking for different people who aren't on the committee, it would appear.
Thank you. I guess, Megan, you haven't spoken yet, and then I think I might want to say something as well, and then we'll have to look at the time. Go ahead, Megan.
I'd just like to know to what end is all of this work going to get us? Because it's clear, not so much from this motion as presented, but the previous one, there was very clearly an agenda and an opinion that the two groups, so the Built Heritage and the culture side, should be separated again. And I'm just wondering, after this group, this prospective group is put together and goes through their process and then reports back to us or to City Council, what then? Is it even feasible to go back to the way things were? So I just question whether it's appropriate to go through all of that work only to change, like nothing will change or nothing can change based on, my understanding is that to bring Heritage Kingston together took a profound amount of work to begin with.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vice Chair, I'd like to speak to the motion. Oh, so Councillor Schell, if you could take the chair.
Take the chair, recognize you.
Thank you. Wish I could stand up at this mic because I really need to stretch my legs. In a nutshell, I fully understand the intent of the motion, but like the two previous speakers, I have some concerns about the precise way that it's coming to us today. On top of that, the really important concern mentioned by Paul that not everybody's here. So if we vote on this today, we're voting yea or nay to something that's we know already is controversial because there's been people spoken on both sides of this today. As chair, I would, I like the diversity of this committee, and I value all the different voices, and I feel that if perhaps we, from a narrow perspective, we were not as functional perhaps as one might hope. But that being said, I feel like as chair, and I've been chair now, this is my 4th term now, just starting as chair, I feel like we're getting somewhere as a group because our debates are meaningful and different points of views are being expressed. And if you've watched debates of other committees or even other councils in other municipalities as well, you will know that this is not always the case. In fact, it's the exception rather than the rule that civilized debate happens. So that to me is actually a huge plus. So although there are members from different backgrounds here, we're starting to figure out how to talk to each other and how to include everyone's voice in the conversations. And in that sense, I feel like the review's timing suggested by this motion is actually premature. Not that it hasn't been a year since the formation or since the merging. That by the letter is true, but is really getting to the. As chair, I only feel like we've been having these productive conversations for the last 2 or 3 meetings, and it would be a real shame to cast doubt on that because I'm actually pretty proud of how far we've come as a committee since the formation is by as expressed by Don at the beginning. He's correct in many ways. It was a great challenge to add this level, the cultural level, and then the museums level to the committee. That it presented a great challenge, and people would always say it was insurmountable. The committee couldn't possibly function. We've been set up to fail. All those kinds of arguments, and whether or not they're true is going to be really up to time to tell. So where does that leave me on this motion? Well, first of all, I'm reluctant to vote on it right now with only 6 of us here. Second of all, I feel like, although I do support the idea of a review, I don't necessarily think that right now is that time. I think we might need more time to function as a group so that we can have a meaningful discussion. Also, I'm a little uncomfortable with just the basic fact that it is a newly formed working group is being proposed that would essentially tell council how to run its committee. And this working group is a collection of citizens. At best, a group like that could really only just provide some useful, constructive criticism. And I don't see how they could really be given the mandate to review this committee's mandate, because that's sort of backwards in the way it works. It's council that needs to review the mandate. And before we can have this conversation at council needs to be better informed about what we're actually doing, because just like Councillor Michelle was saying about the average citizen not knowing what we do here, it's the same with the average councillor. So that's the problem. So if this goes to council right now, I'm not sure if I'm able to even explain it to my colleagues at council. Between Councillor Schell and I, it puts tremendous pressure on Councillor Schell and I to try to make sense of this on behalf of the committee if it passes to council. I'm not ready to go there now, but it is a valid suggestion that we have a review, and it is a valid suggestion that we do some existential soul searching. So what to do about it? We either vote on it now or we don't, and the only way to not vote on it now is to defer it. So I guess I'm going to move deferral. And that is, so then I've given up the chair already, so Councillor Schell, you're in charge of this. I'm going to move deferral, and I will have some arguments about time once I've got a seconder.
Do we have a seconder? Mr. Carl. Okay.
So the rationale for deferral is twofold, so that we can have a greater number of committee members present for the discussion. And the second reason is to allow for the committee to function a few more meetings before we have a review. So that's the rationale, and the time is here's my quandary. So the time is basically, I would top of my head I would say 6 months, but that brings us into the summer. It also brings us in the summer of an election year. Definitely not a good time to talk to other councillors about something like this. And the new committee will be formed again in the next term of council soon enough, in fact in November, December of next year. So I think I'm going to move deferral to December 2018, 1 year from now, 2018.
Okay, the only debate on a motion to defer is time and place. So if people are in agreement with the time and place, we can make a vote. Mr. Taylor.
I understand Councillor Stroud's preference with respect to timing. I'm would be sorry to wait that long. To me and to many of us, things have not been getting better. I think there's an underlying hope that things would get better on the...
We can't really get into a debate, just time.
Okay, time, all right. So what can I say? I'd prefer next meeting, but I guess we all just have to... So the motion is to defer it for a year, and we either approve that or turn it down. Is that right? We can't...
You can amend the time.
Well, let's see what other people say about that.
Well, if there's no amendment, I will just call the question on the deferral. And seeing no other comments, I'm going to call the deferral till December 2018 at the Heritage Committee. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. We will defer this motion until December 2018. Thank you. And I return the chair. I believe we're about to
We
lose
just lost
quorum.
quorum, so this meeting is adjourned.
Okay, thank you.